you know, the WIC executive team, the single most important initiative starting this year and on a 5-year arc is to generate enough revenue from subscriptions. And I'm a digital director, so I lean towards digital, but we're even seeing print subscriptions go up with what we've started with the paywall, but really to generate enough revenue to pay for the newsrooms and grow and expand it. So this investment in Total CMS is really designed to make things easier for all of y'all, so that we don't have one workflow for print, one workflow for digital. We're not asking you to do double work. The idea is that we get it on one platform, and then wherever it makes the most sense for that news to come out first or to come out best, sometimes that's print, you know. Most often it's, you know, get it on the website, get it through your app. You know, apps are rolling out across the company. But it really is to focus on making this a seamless process, because at the end of the day, you know, we want to be able to allow you to focus on what everybody went to journalism school, what everybody is still in this profession for, which is to focus on the connections to the community, the great storytelling that you all do, both, you know, in print and visually, and to really expand and you know, the quality of the content. And then as we grow, to be able to expand newsrooms and take better care of the folks that we have here. So we really appreciate your time and attention. And I'm going to stop talking because I had a quadruple shot of coffee this morning, so I'm going to rein myself in and hand things over to Dylan. What's your last name? McKinley. Dylan McKinley from Town News. He was gracious enough to drive down from Tucson twice, including this morning in the driving rain. And he has a deep background with newspapers. And he's going to be walking us through the training. About an hour and a half through, at about 10:30, we'll take a short break to give you guys a little, you know, refreshment or, you know, just check-in break. But we're gonna stay on schedule. We'll wrap up at noon Arizona time. So thank you all, and Dylan, take us away.
Thank you. All right. A couple of you already know me because you were here yesterday. I'm Dylan McKinley with Town News. I've been on the Total CMS team for 5 years now. I'm trying to keep it short. So anyway, I just wanted to give you guys all a little background on where I come from. Obviously, I do, you know, training for this software, so I'm a computer-y kind of IT kind of person. But my background really is in journalism. I went to school for journalism. I worked in newspapers for 15 years before I started doing this work. I was at the Arizona Daily Star for most of that, mostly doing page design and copy editing in the sports department, but I did a little bit of everything. So I say page design and copy editing in the sports department because I worked on deadline every single night. You know, in the sports department, every night's election night. So I've used this software at the Arizona Daily Star. In the last year and a half I was there, I switched over into the digital team there and used Blox CMS to post to the web in conjunction with Blox Total CMS that was driving the print setup. So, you know, I'm a journalist first, and I think that's one of the things that attracted me to this is the people on my team are also that. We may be computer-y kind of IT people, but we know what you guys are going through, and we've been through system changes ourselves. So my goal is to make this as easy as possible and to make you guys as most comfortable as you can be as we transition to this. The reality is it's not simple to put out a newspaper and a website. They just don't really marry up well together. We have a really good set of software that gives us the tools to allow that to be as easy as possible, though. So let's go ahead and get started. All right, the overview of how this kind of works is you guys have all been using the Blox CMS to post to your website, and that's not going away. You're actually going to continue to use that, and it's going to become your publication system at your various sites that you guys are at. Page designers will have quite a bit more to learn. They go through a bit more training because there's a lot of moving pieces. But for the folks who are reporting and editing and not touching pages, you guys will essentially continue to work out of Blox, and it'll just add a few features to it that bring in the print side of things. So if you want to follow along, if you've got a second screen, feel free to. If you're just watching, that's fine too. So I'm going to start with the Review Herald here, or Herald Review here, just because that's where I am. But it doesn't really matter which site you guys are on. Connect to your own sites. It's all going to be the same in practice. All right, so the first thing you're ever going to see when you log in is this news and update site. There's not really a great deal going on here that you need to pay attention to, except it does have links to our documentation website. help.bloxcms.com. It's a really fantastic site that our team at Town News has put together. Before that, we had documentation, but it wasn't well organized as we'd like it to be, so they went and rebuilt it based on all of our Flex templates for the website of things. Some of you probably know what that means. Anyway, it's a great resource. Lots of videos. If you have somebody starting new, they've got videos on how to create every asset. So do keep that in mind and hold on to that link, and know that you can get to it when you first log in if you're on this news and updates. You can also submit tickets through our system, and if you've got issues, things aren't working right, you can submit a ticket, and that'll usually funnel down to somebody on my team. You can also submit feature requests through there too. That's one of the things I'll mention again later on. We at Town News, and especially on the Total CMS team being newspaper centric, we want to make this better, and we want your feedback. You guys are using it, and despite the fact that I've used it a bunch, I go all over the country and continually find new ways that people want to use it. And sometimes we can find ways to make it work. Sometimes we need to get something new in there, and we enjoy making this product better so that your experience is better. All right, so just general interface stuff to start here. When you first log in, you guys may already be past this, but this button up here says Blox CMS. It's got the little hamburger icon. That's what they call the Hamburger Menu. This is kind of your home base, and you're going to spend most of your time in the Editorial Assets area where we create articles, create images, connect those together as child assets and stuff like that. But we will go over a couple of things that are going to be new to you that also live in that same editorial area. Now, I'm administrator with Town News, so I've got every option available to me here. Your guys' menu is likely going to be much smaller. Generally going to only be editorial, maybe some community stuff with calendar. So don't look here and think you need to see all the things I do. But along with the editorial assets, we have other programs that are running. Now, we're in a web browser, but it's still really like you've got a program on your computer. And that's what these are. They're really applications. So we've got our assets. Obviously, we'll spend a lot of time there. We've also got a couple of things we'll talk about toward the end of the class. Pagetracker is going to be a great tool for you guys who are remote and are having design done here in Sierra Vista, because you can track pages as they're saved, as they're committed to approve. Somebody makes a proof of a page. It's going to give you, you can sort of follow it in real time and see those pages and actually download PDFs at your own leisure. So we'll go through that a little bit. It's real simple, real intuitive. We've also got the ability to connect you to the other sites, other Blox CMS sites that WIC has. All of the various papers are included in your syndication channels. It's a way to essentially look out into another space that's not your own system and pull in assets. So if you're looking to share content, share stories and images and stuff like that, you're going to be able to grab that stuff kind of on the fly. We'll go through that just a little bit. It's also pretty intuitive. So we're going to go ahead and start editorial assets here, and we're just going to dive right into it. So because I'm, again, admin and I'm sort of doing all the training, I have access to all of your various sites from one login. Some of you may have that as well at your various locations because you may deal with multiple papers. So you might have the ability to switch between those CMSs up here. Now I'm going to again start on the Herald Review here because that's where I'm at, but it doesn't really matter which one you guys are connected to. So you might also notice that in the last week or so, they have changed the look and feel of Blox CMS. In some ways, it's a little bit nicer. I feel like it's a little easier to sort of see the various parts without it all sort of running together. But then there's some other stuff I'm not quite used to myself yet. The icons are very different. It's going to take a little bit of getting used to there. But in practice, it's still going to work the same. It's really just a look and feel thing they did to modernize it and bring it up to speed with some of the stuff that's happening in user interface around computing. So the first thing we'll talk about is these various pieces here, because it's going to change a little bit from how you're using it right now. The first thing you'll notice is over here in search terms, we have this slug, and that may have been there before for you, but that's going to be a major thing we'll talk about. We'll spend a little bit of time on that today, really discussing why that's important and how that's going to help you guys find stories and how your designers will find stories. So we've got our search terms over here. The ability to save searches is going to be probably, again, something that's a little bit more important now because stories are going to be going through what we like to call a workflow, and that's essentially the path from which it gets created and then sent to an editor and then maybe sent to the designers and then to some stage of finality at the time the page is sent. And then over here we've got our search results, which you're kind of used to probably, but there's some stuff we're going to add to that. And I kind of want to go slow here because some of this isn't as intuitive as I think it could be. So one thing you probably don't see right now is this slug field right here, the slug column. You probably see in type and title and status and section. So the way this works is if you put your mouse over the label for the column, there's a little arrow that pops in right there. And you can click that arrow, and it's a little bit like using Windows or Mac Finder when you're going through folders. It allows you to add more columns. And so anybody who's doing this right now that's on their own machine, this is going to stick if you do it right now if you're following along. But you're going to want to add slug, workflow, and depth. Now, our system is truly a web-first system. Blox CMS existed well before any kind of tie to the print system. So there's some stuff that's print-centric like slug, workflow, and depth that aren't really there by default. Most of our customers are still not using Blox Total CMS if they have Blox CMS, because we've got thousands of sites using the web system and hundreds of them using Total CMS. So you can add and subtract those to your needs. Most of the ones that are already there, people leave those and just add slug, workflow, and depth. Editors do sometimes like to see last modified time or last modified by, because that'll tell you who last touched the story, what the last time it was saved, stuff like that. So, you know, add what you'd like to. It's not really a hard and fast thing. I just do strongly recommend that slug and workflow and depth are the ones you do add for sure. So once you've got that in there, your slug is probably going to way over here on the right. You see I can click on it and drag it around, but I do want to make a note of how this is kind of, like I said, non-intuitive in a way. Pretty much everything in our system that we do, if you're using a mouse pointer, it's the very tip of your mouse pointer, the actual point on the arrow that matters. So when I click on slug and I want to move that around, I don't really care about any icons I see. It's just about where I'm putting that tip of that mouse pointer. So you see if I move it across, I'll get little blue arrows. And I generally suggest that you put slug right between type and title, because that's going to be the very first thing you're looking at in your print workflows. And since everything kind of becomes tied together now with the way our system works, that's going to be a real important one. So I suggest moving that over there. You'll notice when I move it, I do get this little thing underneath, and lots of people want to try to drag that in line. You see it's got a red no slash sign through it. So again, remember that if you're moving stuff around, it's about the tip of the mouse pointer. And again, that's kind of the way it is throughout our interface. And you can set those how you like them. Now, if you're not working on your own machine right now, if you're not on a laptop, if you're on like a borrowed laptop, you're using somebody else's computer, this is something you'll have to set again when you get back to your normal workstation, because these are handled by cookies in the browser, and so that doesn't travel with you. The next thing we're going to do is a little bit of setup in the background for the user account, and that stuff will stick, so you're not going to have to do this next part twice. But that's kind of the first thing we want to do, is get this set up so you're seeing what you need to see, and you're not hunting and pecking to find stuff. Probably the biggest change on this, using this system coming from no system at all, or another system you might be using, is the way that we do searching. We don't have folders you move things into. It's just kind of everything's in a big database, and you use your search terms to whittle that down to what you're looking for. By the end of the class, you should have a pretty good sense of that. It's actually really powerful, the way that we handle our slug searching, and our search terms over here have lots of options. You know, I like to say there's 1,000 ways to skin a cat in this system. It's a lot like Adobe Photoshop or something like that, where you can do one action 100 different ways. We do, you know, want you guys to be comfortable and use this software in the way that you feel is best for you. So we don't have a whole great deal of hard and fast rules, and we do give you a lot of options. All right, so with that all said, let's all take a look up here. At the upper right, we've got a button that'll say logged in as, and it should have your email address if you're following along. If you click on that button, we get some options to set to your account. And again, this will travel with you. Once you set this stuff, it'll stick. So do be aware, if you make a change here, it's going to be there when you move to another computer. All of these things are also changeable. You're not setting it once and it's always stuck that way. So you do have the option to come back here and make a change later on. So the first thing we want to do is go to the Preferences menu here, and we're going to skip the default asset start time, which sounds like a really nice idea, but it really is kind of only for weekly newspapers that want to put all their content online at the same time every week, which is kind of things have moved away from that. weeklies now have the capability to use their website and their digital presence to post stories throughout the week and not just have that one day a week where everything's coming out. So we'll skip that one. That's not something that's really much used. The next one down is real helpful though. This is our default asset workflow. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about workflow later on, but for now, go ahead and click it if you're following. And it's going to pop up in a little box, and you guys should see none in there right now, but you're going to want to set that to print and web. And the workflow is just a quick overview, or essentially, like I said, that path by which a story goes from a stage of being created to an editor stage to putting it on the page stage. And along with that, it's going to automate a lot of the things that you guys are having to do manually now with the web. For instance, it's going to, you can tell a story to automatically go online when it moves past that first editor stage. So it'll be not visible to the public up to that point until, when they get done editing and they save and close it, there's an option to move it to the next stage, and that'll automatically give it the pieces it needs to display on your website. So print and web is what we're going to start with because most papers, most content is going to go to both mediums. And what that's going to do is it's going to make every story you start automatically be there, taking away the need to go click a button and set that. And of course, once you have a story created, you can then change it. There's going to be times when you have content that's only for print, truly only for print. You don't want that to show on your site. And there's also going to be stuff you're going to do that's going to go web only and it isn't going to have a presence in the paper. So after the fact, you can change this, but it's a good idea to set this right now at print and web so that you're not having to constantly click buttons to get that in the right workflow. The next one down from there in the preferences is the default asset author. Now, the author drives a lot on the website of things in terms of being able to track who created a story. It's essentially a label on a story that is searchable, and you can use it on your website to display, for instance, a different byline style or a different tagline style than your print product has. So the thing about this one, though, and you're going to want to think about making a choice here, the idea is kind of if you're somebody who has a byline on most of the things you do, you can set this to yes. And after we set up the next part of your account setup here, it will automatically introduce your byline and your tagline to your story. It seems like a small thing. Oh, I type out my byline every day. I type out my tagline every day. You're probably real used to that, or you copy and paste it from somewhere. But everything that we're about with this total CMS system is efficiency and taking any of the tedious formatting or as much human error we can pull out of the process as possible. We're going to do that. So automatically applying a byline to a story is something that, is one less chance for somebody to make a typo. It's also one less thing you have to mentally think about. It's just going to be set. It's going to be automatic. Now, if you're not somebody who has bylines most of the time, let's say you also handle a lot of handout content or you create a lot of briefs that don't get your byline, you're probably not going to want to check yes on here because then every single thing you create is going to get your byline. You're going to have to take it off a lot of it. And it's a lot easier to add it than it is to subtract it. So make that choice sort of on your own. And if you make one choice now and decide next week when we're going live that, oops, I wanted it the other way, you're free to come back in here at any point in time and change that. I'm going to go ahead and set yes to mine just so I can demo how that works. And then again, pick what you'd like there. The next thing I just want to touch on in preferences is you have the ability to change the size of your text and your body copy as you write your article. It's purely for your own eyes on the screen. It doesn't have any connection to the web or print end products. It's really just a visual thing. So if you decide you need a little bit bigger text, you can set that as a global default. You can also change it from within an asset, within an article that you're writing. So I'll show you that here in a little bit too. The next thing we want to do, again, if you're following along, is go down to the edit account. Again, back in the same login button. The edit account, there's two things we can do here. If you, for some reason, don't already have a password that you like, you can come to the authentication tab across the top at the far right, and you can click the little box next to change that password, and then you can put your new one in and type it again and confirm it. You probably all have passwords that you're set with, so you don't need to do that part, but just so you know that that's there. And I think you guys probably already changed or asked to change your password somewhat frequently for security. So that's how you get to that. The next part is the actual part where we're going to, inject that byline and the tagline. The important part here is to get the case right, make sure you have the right number of lines correct. You don't have to worry about formatting of it at all because both the print side is where this is really important too. The InDesign translation that we do when we take our web first stories and put them on an InDesign page is going to take your bylines and your taglines and put them in the right styles. So it's important just that you get the casing right. So if you're upper and lower, make sure you get that right. And then that you actually, if you've got a second line, you hit return and type in that second line as well. And so, of course, I don't really have a real one, so I'll just say Town News Trainer. And then your tagline also will be, similar to that. It usually is used for, contact on Twitter or an email address or something like that. So fill that out. Make sure that you have that right. Once it's good and you've got it right, then, like I said, you don't ever have to worry about that. You can always click a button to add yours, or you can have it set to add automatically. Once you've got that set, go ahead and hit save, and then we will have that part set up. Now, again, that stuff will not change. It's going to follow you, but you will need to remember to change your column labels and stuff when you get back to your normal machine if you're not working on your regular one. So let's come back now to this main area. I'm not going to spend a great deal of time because you guys are fairly familiar with using this. Most of you are, at least. And I know you've been through a little bit of training with Alessia too as well. So again, we've got our search terms over here, the ability to save searches down here, and then we've got the pot of content over here. By default, when you log into the system, if you haven't set anything up in your saved searches, it's going to show you every piece of content that's in there. In the lower right, it's going to tell you how many assets are available to look at in this current search you've done. And in this case, it's everything. So we've got assets 1 through 25. That is one limitation that we do have imposed. We've got thousands of different publications that are posting to websites every day going through our system. So in order to keep performance high, they decided to limit the number of search results per page. The higher that number gets, the more processing power it takes, and it can slow other sites down. So they've limited it to 25 for each page. That's generally not too much of an issue for newsrooms that are doing, inputting articles and throwing in photos here and there. It's mostly kind of annoying for web managers who might have more than 25 assets they want to deal with. So it's probably not going to impact you too much, but do understand that's why you see 1 through 25 of some large number. So that's our default search of everything. And if you click the reset button over in search terms, it's going to give you that same thing. It's going to clear out anything you have in your search area, and then it's going to show you again back to the default of everything. And it's important to remember that reset button because it's extremely easy to forget that you've got something checked down here that's not visible at the moment. And you go to search for something and you can't find it, even though you should be able to find it with the terms you're using. So the reset button is one of your best friends. Go ahead and click that and try your search again, and as long as you've got your pieces right, you should find it. So coming back over here, the other thing to note is that all of our views here are going to default to showing you the most recent content first, out into the future sometimes, based on the start time of an asset. The start time you're probably familiar with if you've used Blox CMS, but that is a web-only situation. It doesn't have anything to do with print, and it's the time at which a story will become visible on your website to the public. So you're going to see stuff in your various CMSs, whether you're on My Herald Review or you're up in the Iberia or over in Green Valley. You see we've got all the sites available here. The designers are going to see what I see because they're going to be doing a lot of your pages, so they need access to all this. But again, you guys will probably only see the ones that are relevant to you. So coming back over here, the start date and time, it's always going to be newest first. So just keep that in mind. You can change that. There may be a time when you have a specific search and you are looking by title and you want to see that alphabetical order by title because that's making sense for what you're doing at that point in time. So that same place we went to change our columns, you can go in and change and tell it to sort ascending or descending. Now, just a word of warning, that doesn't work on every single label we have. There are some that you might try that with and they're grayed out and don't work. I don't have an answer to why that is, but some of those fields did not get that treatment. The ones that you use most often have it though. So if I wanted to click on title, now I'm going to see there's going to be a little bit of a wait while it sorts through 136,000 assets here. But I've just now told it to show me based on an ascending search. So anything before A, it's going to have special characters and then numbers, and then it's going to go into your A's and B's and C's alphabetically. You see it gets a little arrow there that'll tell you. You click on the title again, it'll flip that around and it'll show you the other way. So you do have some controls on what you're looking at here. You're not locked into only seeing it by start date and time. That said, most people don't really change it because seeing things, the newest first is pretty common. So I personally don't mess with that real often unless, again, I have like a specific set of search terms and I want to see them in order. So I'm going to go through real quick and show you what we've got here. So first, you're going to see this type column. You see they all have little icons. And they're new, and the more I look at them, I think they actually might be a little bit easier to see than they were in the old setup, just because there's not a bunch of lines running across the screen now that are real dark. So the type icon is going to tell you what it is, and you'll notice if I hover over it, it actually gives me that label. The other thing you've got is if you're over in your search terms, it may not be expanded, and you click the little arrow, you can expand your type field. It's got an example of what each of those are. So if you're like, hey, I see this icon, I've never seen that before, a little box, well, somebody's created a zip file of documents or something and uploaded that to your site. So keep in mind that the type icon is a real handy way to sort of figure out what you're looking at. And since you're going to be using this for everything, instead of just posting web content to it, you will be doing a lot more searching of content here. So keep that in mind. The title is going to be your web headline. Now, I'm currently in a specific view mode called Show Summaries. And what that does, it's going to give you the first graph of your story or the summary that you've filled out in the app, that there's a place to sort of trump the first graph and instead put your own content there. It's going to show you the web title and that, and then if it has any kind of art attached to it, or if it has a preview. Right now I'm looking at a YouTube asset, but the preview right here comes from that. So you'll see the first piece of art that's connected with that, whether it's a YouTube or an article or whatever. We don't have a way to show you any of the other photos right here. You do have to open the asset to see if there are more photos attached to your story. But that's kind of the setup for title. The status field, there's not a lot going on in here because we really haven't done much yet with the print side. We're sort of just getting started on this project this week. But as you go, you're going to see some real important stuff in here. For instance, there's going to be a little logo for InDesign that'll show up in the status field, and that'll let you know that story is actually on a page. Some of you guys will be using content in multiple publications, and so you can sort of tell where it's been placed already. It's also going to have the do not publish, which is a real important part of what we're doing with this specific incarnation of Blox Total CMS. The do not publish is kind of your toggle for whether something's live on the web yet or not. That also shows up in the status field. So that's another one. These first four, you're going to spend a lot of time looking at. Now, as we go across, it's probably going to be less and less that you'll pay attention to on every single story you're searching. But we've got your section tags, where it shows up on your website. The workflow, which again, we'll talk about the details of that in a minute, but that's going to be handy to pick out real quick. Okay, is this story still being worked on by a reporter, or has it been sent to an editor, or may it already be to the designers and being placed on a page? Author field, again, the author doesn't itself do anything for print and web. It's just, again, a label that gets attached to any content that's created by a person. Makes it easy to search by that. And that's one of the things we're going to set up for all of you who do reporting, is a saved search based on your author, so that when you, either when you log in first, we can set it to be default, or at your choosing, you can then look at only your content. Folks who are doing editing, folks who are doing page design, they need to see everything. They need to search through stuff based on workflows. But people are generating content, not doing much of that other stuff. It's not so important for you guys to have to pick through other people's content. So you can sort of set it so that it's all by yours. Then the next couple things, priority, if you guys are using that for your website, continue to use it as you are. That's one overarching thing I'll probably say a few times as well. You're not going to change a lot of what you're doing for the website. The only thing we're going to do is add in the print stuff, which may change a little bit how things work, but if you're using priority, you'll still use priority. You continue to put the section tags on it as you always have. Start date and time will continue to be something you'll need to adjust manually to make sure that you're getting stuff online at the time you want to. And then finally over here, we've got a depth count, which is real handy for anybody who's dealing with wire content. Also easy to get a quick look at a story and see exactly what is going on with the length. And that's going to be based on one standard column width with body type. So it might be off a little bit if you're dealing with an editorial that may have slightly larger point size or more leading between the lines. but it's not a significant difference even then. So you're pretty confident that it's going to be, you know, this long in terms of body copy, and then maybe adjust it mentally a little bit for dealing with other stuff that might be bigger or smaller. So then down here at the bottom, we've got some abilities to control the page we're looking at. So it's all, again, dealing with the number of assets you have here. And I'm on a basic search that's got everything. So I'm looking at page 1 of 5,464. You can use these little radio buttons, next page, first page, previous page, that kind of stuff to get to the end or beginning. If you want to rerun your search, there's a refresh button here. That's important because we don't really do any kind of live updating. If you put the new story in, it's not just going to pop in there in front of you. You do have to refresh your search. Just a little note here, the refresh button and the search button actually do the same thing. They just run whatever search terms you have in here again. So keep that in mind. And then I was talking a minute ago about our title field having more than just a web title. Some people like to work in this setup because they see more of, you know, more of what's going on. It's not just a title and section tags. Other folks really prefer to work in the hide summaries mode, which is the button next to show summaries. And then it's just a list without those extra pieces. The nice thing, though, is if you want to see those summaries in that piece of art, you can still do so by hovering over the icon for type, which no longer just tells you what the type is, but now includes that. So you don't have to be in one view or the other to see this bit. You just have to remember what to do to get to it if you're in the hide summary. And then the one thing I didn't talk about with these column labels up here, again, not necessarily intuitive. And those of you here in the building, you can't really see, but there are dividing lines between each column label. And the rule for changing these is if you want to make one wider or skinnier, you got to grab the right side of it. So for instance, if I want to make my title bar a little bit wider, I'm going to hover over it, make sure I get to the right. And the minute I get over that line, I get a sideways arrow, a little bit of visual feedback, so you've got it. And I mention that because it can be kind of touchy hitting those things. It's real easy to miss them. So once you get it and you drag it, you see it'll only change the one that you're on. It won't change the other sections. So you don't want to grab it by the left because that's just going to change the one to the left of it. And mostly you want to be able to see, as I accidentally click on title and sort by it, go back to my start time. Mostly you're going to want to see the slug and the title fields expanded so you're not having to view something that's cut off, because those are probably the two single most useful fields when you're looking at a search. So real quick, I just want to run through the search terms here. Now, we don't have a slug really on most of these stories because it's your live site you guys have been using, and slug is not something that really was needed for the web. In fact, we actually, the way this system was built, it was web first. There was no tie to the print side until 2010 when they decided to build in the connection to InDesign and make it more print-centric and allow it to be one for all. So the slug field kind of got bolted on after the fact. It wasn't really there to begin with. And that does change how we have to search it. So you'll notice that first over in the search terms, there are two different fields here. Just to sort of plant the seed, as I like to say early on, we'll come back to this, but the search text field, just think of it like a Google search. You know, if I'm looking for a story about President Trump, I'm going to put in President Trump. I do have to spell it correctly. And it's going to show me every story that's got the words president and Trump in it. It doesn't even matter if I do it by case. I can just throw it in there all lowercase. And there are certain things like, you know, and or operators. We've got some stuff in our user guide that I'll make sure everybody gets a copy of that goes into detail about, extended searches. You guys may already know some tricks on searching. So just keep in mind that doing a general search of all content with the search text field is just like going to Google. You don't have to think too much about what you're inputting there. The slug field is very, very different though. It's case sensitive. It's got some rules in it that you can't break. It can be very difficult to use it if you're not aware of these things. And we'll talk about that in detail once we get into the assets and create some slugs. But the other thing that's nice about the search terms here we've got, you can stack stuff together. You know, you may be searching for President Trump up here, and you might decide, I don't want to see any images. I only want to see articles. So you can tell it, show me only articles. And our system gives you feedback based on the search that you run last. How many assets exist in our system? Assets just being these various bits of content. I didn't really describe that up front, but that's our term for it as an asset. So an article asset with that previous search that I did was 1,229. only 36 images, but I still don't want to have to hunt and peck through them, so I can tell it, show me only articles when I search. And I think that term is the same as what I had just run, so, and that's the case. So I'm looking at only articles now, and I've only got, 50 pages instead of 5,000 pages. So you can stack that on top of it. We've also got the ability to search by section tag. If you've got a specific section tag you always use, or you know that somebody submitted a story, forgot to put the slug on it, but you know that they're really good at putting a section tag on it, you can find a story through that method as well. You can search by start date and time, keeping in mind again that start date and time is only for web. That's nothing to do at all with the print product. It's, all it means is exactly when you want that story to go live on your website. The author field is a little bit of a tease. It looks like you can click in there and type. You can't. You have to click the little magnifying glass. But it makes it very easy to find, for instance, content by a specific user. So I'm going to do mine. I'm going to pick my PN trainer here. And if I get rid of my President Trump search and do a search here, it's going to bring back anything that I've created. And it looks like I've got nothing in the Herald Review because I was working out of something yesterday. Now, I'm going to do a reset on my search just to make sure I don't have anything else checked. I'm going to go back and do that again because this is something that reporters, you guys are all going to want to do with me here if you can. You're going to want to put your own name in here and find yourself. I do have to click the buttons here. It's not very good with hitting enter. Enter doesn't do much. You have to go click search. But once you've found your own name and you click select user and it's in there, run that search. You're not going to probably find anything in there. Well, maybe you do because you guys actually have authors set up a lot already. So you might find all your stories in there. If you haven't used the system very much, maybe you won't see much. But this is how we're going to do a save search now. By putting in some sort of term here, TN trainer in this case, and actually running the search, then once I've done that, I can come down here and save it. Again, it's important that you click the search button before you try this because it's just going to capture whatever was in there the last time you did a search. So making sure I've got that set, I can now come down to this very small panel in the bottom left, and we can use the little plus icon that, if you see that in our Blox browser-based system here, that's a way to add something new that doesn't exist. So I can click the plus on that, and then I can name this search, and I generally suggest that people call it something like my stuff or my stories, my articles, whatever you like best, because you're the only ones that will see this. Now you might think, hey, I'm the only one that can see this, but I can share it. Well, don't do that, because if you share yours, everybody will see it, and they can't get rid of it. And if everybody starts sharing all their searches, this becomes very crowded down here. You can see there's one in there by Alessia that's a very good one for everybody to have, so she shared that out. Essentially what you'll do per site is have probably one person that'll be your point person who creates all your saved searches, because there are going to be some that you want to share with your colleagues. But in this case, what we're doing is just setting it up so that reporters, you guys have a quick way to see all of your own stuff, and you're not having to try to pick it out among other things. That's probably the steepest learning curve with using Blox CMS in an expanded role is how do I get my searches so I'm not spending time hunting and pecking. And this is one way for reporters for sure to make it real easy. Once you've got that set, click Save Changes, and now you've got a new entry here under My Saved Searches. The little plus will collapse and expand those things. I can look at the one that was shared by Alessia. She's got one that's for local stuff that's got a specific search term on it. So once I've got these set here and I'm looking at mine, if I do a reset and blank out all my search stuff that's up here and set it back to nothing, then if I want to run my saved search, I can simply come down and find this one and double click it. And all it's doing is repopulating my search terms. There's nothing fancy or special about this. It's literally just capturing what you put in there and then filling it back out. So one of the things that editors and designers will do is they may have one based on workflows. They may have a print and web stage that they're looking for stories, and they may set that and save it. But once they run it, then they can come up here and use their slug to whittle it down to only showing content for one day and even one section. We'll talk about that here not too long once we get into assets. Once you've got that saved, if you want that to be your default when you first log in, then you can select your My Articles or whatever you called it. It's kind of hard to see on the screen, but it does get a blue background. And you can click the little heart button. You also notice, if you've been paying attention at all to what I've been doing, there's a lot of hover tooltips. Put your mouse pointer over something that looks like an icon, and you're generally going to get some kind of feedback from our system of what that is. In this case, the heart is telling it to be the default search when you first come in here. So if I You know, if I were to log out and log back in, I'm actually just going to refresh my browser page, which is not something people do real often. But if I refresh my browser page, it's going to set me back here, and it's going to automatically run the My Article search. You'll see if you look down there that it should have your author in there. So keep that in mind. You've got some control over that. You can undo that by clicking the heart, and it'll make it go away. You can duplicate searches, not something that's real huge, but you duplicate one. Generally, it's used by grabbing one that's shared and duplicating it so that it's part of your searches as well. So keep that in mind. You've got some options. You can delete searches and move them around and stuff like that.
So if you have a safe search, you can actually then whittle it down further by going to the panel above.
Correct. That's exactly it. Yeah, that's a good way to put it, Dan. So again, you've got something down here that's got some pieces that you never want to have to come click, but every day you're probably going to have to punch in something for slug. Otherwise, you're going to update your saved searches every day. So yeah, so once you've got your saved search run, then you can tack on more search to it, click the search button, and it's not going to affect your saved search or anything. It's just adding more stuff to it. All right, so we've kind of gone over the interface here. I'm going to do a reset and just real quick run through the stuff up top. If I've got an asset selected, you see all that stuff becomes visible. The print icon is probably new to you. That's something that comes from our traditional Total CMS install that is not tied directly to the Blox web interface. And it's the ability to simply get a quick printable article that you can take with you. If you're working on a story and you want to go to lunch, you don't want to bring your laptop, you want to eat and look at it on paper and mark it up, you can make a quick printout. It's actually going to take you to your print dialog. If I cancel that, you'll see it's actually just well, before I bring down my little bar too far, it actually creates a new tab on your browser. So I was in Editorial Assets when I did print. It created a new tab and generated a web page. And you can see it's actually got any of the art that's connected to it will be there. So you got the ability to print that stuff out real quick. And on the topic of browser tabs, we are pretty much browser agnostic. We don't mind if you're using Chrome or Firefox. If you're on a Mac, Safari is plenty good. The only one we really don't do much support for anymore is old school Internet Explorer. You probably won't even have that on your system if you're using a Windows machine that's Windows 8 or newer. Windows 7 users will probably still see that. And it's not that it doesn't work at all. It's just that you might run into something that goes funky and then it won't work and you'll have to reload it. So we don't suggest using Internet Explorer unless it's a pinch. But we are browser agnostic, and we do also have the capability to have multiple tabs open in your browser that point to Blox CMS. This is handy for editors, especially people who handle wire content. I know there's not a lot of that in the WIC companies, but there are some who are going to do wire pages, and they may have different searches they're using. So most browsers these days, you can duplicate a tab by doing a right-click on it or a command-click if you're on a Mac. This is something Firefox recently added. You used to have to do a keyboard shortcut to do it, but now they've added it to the menu because I think they realized that a lot of people don't remember keyboard shortcuts or don't care to. So you can duplicate any tab you've got. What that's going to do is get you back in here, and it'll allow you to run a different search. I can do a reset, and I can run a search on just articles here. And you see now I've got multiple tabs open with different search results there. So keep that in mind. You're not stuck in one browser tab. And I bring that up because if you're dealing with content and you need to go search for something else, there can be a lot of clicks involved with closing something out or moving it out of the way and opening something else. So do be aware you can have multiple tabs open. And once we talk about Pagetracker, you're probably going to want to, those of you who are remote following anything throughout the evening, you're probably going to want to have one open that's on Pagetracker and one open that's on your Editorial Assets, just so you don't have to go back and forth between the different buttons. Because a lot of times you'll have a search term in here that you're not going to change all day. If you're a sports editor and you're looking only at sports stories, you're going to have a slug search that's based on sports. You may put that in at the beginning of the day and then click search a whole bunch of times all day long because you're just waiting for stuff to pop in to read. And then you can have something else open in the other tab. So keep in mind that that's something we don't mind. You can have as many as you want. You're not going to affect performance. You're not going to affect anything at all. You can have thousands of tabs open if you really want to, although I don't suggest that because then that gets confusing as well. All right, so back up here, we talked about the print button. The other one that's incredibly important for you guys is the view button, and that's something you're probably already somewhat familiar with, but it's got a couple of options. Now, if I just click view, it's going to take me to the preview. And it's kind of hard to see on my projection screen here, but when I click the little arrow next to the view button, I get two options. And the bolded option, preview, is what happens if you simply click the view button. So it's saying that's the default. If you don't click the arrow and you just click view, that's going to take you to the preview of that. Now that's important. You're going to use that a lot because your story may not go live right away. It may not be live until the next day. It may not be live until that evening after it's been read by a couple of editors. But you may have done some fanciness to it to make it look really pretty for your readers. Like maybe you've gone and gotten you've added Twitter through the built-in Twitter button. You've added a Twitter card, the nice official Twitter, web card that people can then click on and go to Twitter and see what's going on there. Maybe you've added a YouTube video that's in line in your story, so it goes right to the piece you're talking about. You want to be able to see that stuff as it's going to look when it goes live, because you do now have a lot of control over that right at the beginning of your story. It's not something that has to be done after the fact. And again, that's kind of the idea behind this system, is let's have reporters who have, maybe they've got an audio clip from a 911 call that got released by the police department that's of interest to your readers. Maybe they've got a PDF of a court case. Maybe you want to put a poll with your story. All of these things will display on the web in various ways, and you've got controls over that, and we'll talk about that in a little bit, but the preview button is going to take you and show you what that story looks like, whether it's live or not on the web. So it's going to kind of give you a little bit of a peek at what it is. Now, this right here, it looks like it's using the, I think I'm in web view, aren't I? Yeah, I think my browser's kind of skinny, so it thinks I'm looking on a web. I don't have the full browser page on this one. And I don't think there's a way to change that through the menu. So if you're on a mobile device, you're probably going to see this view. If you're on a desktop with a wider screen, I'm connected to a projector, so it's got a low resolution. You're going to see the actual regular desktop view here. But it's going to give you an idea of what, where your photo is, if you've dragged anything in line. Well, there's an interesting one. It's probably an ad or something, or like a space for an ad. So keep in mind you've got the view button, and then live view is if you actually want to see it live on the web because it's there already, you can click that. If we haven't yet reached the start date and time, which this one actually has, so it would show up live, then it'll show you a 404 error and say it's not available yet. The export button you can skip. That's a way to actually download assets directly to your desktop and then upload them into another CMS. We've got the tool I mentioned at the very beginning, syndication, that allows you to do that without having to deal with files in your computer's file interface. So that's not something that's really used in most places. Duplicating a story may be something you need to do. If you select a story and duplicate it, it'll make a copy, and then it'll actually throw the word copy onto it. It'll automatically check the do not publish, because as you might imagine, if you've got a story that's live on the web and you duplicate it, if we didn't give it a block to stop it from being visible on the web, you would then have two stories, same stories, right next to each other on your website. And readers look at that stuff and they go, oh, those silly newspaper people did something wrong. So the duplicate button is there. It's got some built-in protections. Not something that gets used real frequently, but I know there are some papers that are going to use content in the paper that they deal with mainly, and maybe share it with another site, or maybe you're working for two papers at the same time. It sounds like Nogales and Sarita have some overlap there. So there may be times when you want to duplicate something and not have that second one go live. There's a lot of different ways to go about doing that, so we'll talk about those as well. Edit is just the same as double-clicking to open. Batch edit is one I want to spend just a quick couple of seconds on now, because that's a good way to take a bunch of assets. You see we've got these checkboxes over here and allow us to multi-select. You can take a bunch of assets at one time and you can change some of the attributes of them. You can add section tags. You can subtract section tags that are on there. If maybe somebody, you have a new hire and they're putting the wrong section tag on a bunch of stuff, you don't have to go through each one and undo it. You can select them all together and go in and then take those off. Keywords, flags, if you want to do web only, or you've got 3 or 4 stories that are all breaking that you want to rotate through your breaking flag, and all the way down to some real fine-grained stuff like the start date and time. You've got a bunch of stories that you want to all go live at 3 p.m. Select them all, tell them all to go live at 3 p.m. You can also change workflow processes and publication status. That's going to be your do not publish button. All that stuff can be done batch. So one of the things, again, that I'm going to mention is we do have quite a few clicks in this interface. It's designed to be kind of easy for even the lowest level of computer savvy user, somebody who's, you know, not necessarily, you know, real adept with using computers. So we're trying to make it easy for them above all. And for some of us who move faster, that can kind of be annoying, but Dispatch Edit gives us a little bit more control over multiple assets. You can also change your presentation modes. We'll talk about those here in a minute. Now that affects the print side of things. So that's your batch edit. We've also got a couple more things here. Now the unlock is not available unless something actually is opened by somebody else. If I open this asset, it's going to put an icon in my status bar. Now this one is, it says I am currently editing the asset, but if you guys do a reset and look at it on your end, you'll see a little padlock. And if you hover over it, it'll tell you who has that asset open. Now, you'll very, very rarely have to unlock something, but sometimes somebody leaves and doesn't come back for the day and has left their story open, and you need to get into it to edit it. And you need to place it on the page, and the designer needs to get into it. So there will be times when you need to unlock. Now, the hard and fast rule on this one, and keep this one, jot this down, always to whoever the person is who's got it locked before you unlock it. Because if they are working in it and you just think they're gone, and you unlock it, you will then have access to it, and anything you change will be overwritten by their next save. So the unlock button is there because you probably will need it at some point. Somebody will eventually forget and do something that they shouldn't. But again, communicate with that person before you ever unlock anything, because it can definitely lead to some sidestepping and some redoing of things. You know, we do keep revisions, so it's hard to actually lose your stuff. But maybe the change you made is, you know, you don't want to lose the changes they made, so now you have to confer and figure out, you know, what needs to be added to which side. And then finally, we have the ability to delete assets. Not something you'll probably do real frequently, but, you know, maybe something got created that is a story that turns out to be flawed in some fatal way and it's never going to run. You know, you can delete that right out of the system. Now, once you click that, it's going to move it to a different queue in our database. You know, if I come to my search terms and go all the way to the bottom, I've got this deleted option. Now, when you first look at it, it's kind of a weird interface. Click on the button. Oh, they changed it. It used to be if you clicked on it, it would make the scroll wheel go up, but you couldn't see what was underneath it. Oh, there we go, just like I did. You see I'm clicking on it, and I'm not seeing what's underneath it, so you do have to sometimes scroll down to see the two options. By default, we're looking at not deleted, so most of your content is in that pool. But if I click on deleted assets only and run a search, then it's going to show me everything that's been purged. And now, the reason we have this option to search these is that we are very careful about losing things. We don't want you guys to accidentally delete something and then have it be gone for good. So once you click delete, you've got 7 days from the time you click that button before it actually then will delete out of the system. So you do have a whole week buffer there. Now, nothing's going to delete automatically. Anything you guys create from scratch, anything you guys do locally is going to always be in the system forever. We expect that to never have a reason to be deleted. The stuff that will get deleted is going to be some stuff like this that you see that has a key on it, which is almost assuredly coming from Associated Press or some other wire service. The key icon means that it's got digital rights management on it. Which one? Is that over in other? Oh, yeah, that's something we don't have on the total CMS side. Okay, cool, yeah. Those little key icons will tell you why it's something that you can't necessarily, you know, publish online or put somewhere else. It'll give you some information on that. All right, so the deleted queue, again, remember that and this is a good thing to remember because somebody might accidentally delete something too. If you know you've got the right slug, or you know you've got the person's name and search text and it's not coming up with anything, remember your deleted assets. To this day, I do that. I accidentally deleted something in my test setup and I couldn't find it. And I was pulling my hair out. What's wrong? I think something's broken. And then after like 5 minutes of that, I was like, oh yeah, maybe I deleted it. So keep that in mind. All right, any questions at all about the interface here or something that I touched on that you wanted to hear more about? And that goes for you guys out there on the call too. If there's anything you guys want to hear or something you want to know more about, please do stop me. I could talk for hours and hours and hours, but I'm really here to help you guys make this make sense. I'm here for you guys to understand it. So don't hesitate to stop me and say, hey, stop and explain that, because I'm not going to get offended. I don't mind at all.
So if you delete a story that is online, how long does it take before it's online? or do you just put the do not publish button?
Generally, you're going to want to, if something's online, you just want to pull it so it's not visible to your users. Do not publish is going to be your best bet. But delete, I think it's going to be about however long it takes for that asset to cycle back through the whatever our robot is that posts it. So how it works is we've got like I said, 1,000 sites and everybody's posting stuff. So when something goes live or something gets saved, it ends up in a queue and it's, a single file line and it's just going through one at a time. That's doing it pretty fast. When you got 1,000 sites, you might have, 10,000 articles all going up at one time. So it might be a minute or two before you see that happen. So, you click save on a story you want to go live, it's not going to go live immediately because of that built-in buffer. So if you're actually trying to delete it and you click delete, however long it takes for that action to get through there, it could be a minute, it could be two. It could be as small as 30 seconds if there's nobody else, if you're here in the middle of the night doing stuff. And that does happen sometimes, if you've got some giant fire that happens in the middle of the night, someone needs to come in and get that, set up for web or needs to coordinate an effort. So there are some instances that that's the case. Okay, so what do we got here for time? 10:07, good. We'll start moving into the meat and potatoes of your system is going to be the article asset. And creating a new article asset will almost always come from here. It's your little plus new asset button. Now there are some other options here, such as creating an image, creating collections, which is going to be galleries, slideshows of images, but it could also be a collection of just about any kind of asset. And the rest of our assets live in this more folder because you don't use those nearly as often as the ones right here. Article is the one that drives everything. Every newspaper, every print publication, that's their single most important part that they're doing is writing stories. So that's at the top. We do have the ability to merge articles into one piece. It's not really frequently used for the print side of things. If you guys are using it for something on the web, continue to do that. It's not something that's going to harm the print side. It's just a way to take multiple stories and combine them together. And then image, obviously, and collection. Now, most of the time, you're not going to click any of these from this menu. And I touched on this just a little bit yesterday, but the article you will because it's almost always something from scratch. But most of the other pieces are going to be connected to your article. You're probably not going to have a 911 call that's related to your article that's not connected as a child asset. So it's a lot easier to, from within the article, create things from scratch like audio, links, PDFs, polls, and stuff. You also have the option to, instead of having to go all the way over to a different view, you can get to syndication from here as well. And you can also get to syndication from your child assets. So we'll talk about that as we go in. One thing I failed to mention yesterday, the batch upload is a great tool to get a bunch of photos in the system in one go, but it doesn't append the slug. It doesn't give any slug whatsoever. So once you do that, you still have to go then in and put a slug on your images. Now you can do that at batch edit, so it's not too tedious. But do keep in mind that there are some limitations with batch upload, and you do want to have images for print. You want to have slugs on those because your designers and editors are going to need to see those as well. So for now, let's go ahead and start in the article, and I'm just going to kind of give you the rundown for how this ties into print. And most of you have done this before. You've created an article, you've moved content from your whatever print side of things over here, and so you're familiar with getting stuff online. That pretty much isn't going to change. There's not a lot you're going to do differently in terms of that stuff. The stuff that's going to be new is what you need to think about for print. The first thing, of course, you see is we've got this web headline, field is required. You probably already know if you try to click save, it's not going to save. Now that's because if you're on a landing page, such as the front page of the Herald Review here, and you get to a list of articles like latest breaking news, the only thing clickable there is the actual headline. So we force a web title, a web headline to be on every asset. And as such, there's a kind of a rule of thumb that I like to give on this. Because you have to have one there, and this could potentially go live at any time by somebody clicking a button, you want to make sure your web headline is not something that would embarrass you if it showed up online. It doesn't have to be a great headline. It doesn't even have to be a good one. It just has to be something that's not going to look wrong to the readers. Now, I bring that up because maybe I'm writing a story about high school football tonight, and there's a state championship game I'm doing, and maybe there's a brief that comes across at noon, and I want to tack that onto that story because I don't have any more space to put it somewhere else. So I'm going to start that story then. I don't want to wait until halftime and add it after I've started my story later because I can do it now. I might as well save me time during the game. So if I'm writing a high school football story, maybe I just do something like this for now. High school football, colon, East versus West, 7 p.m. Now, is it a great headline? No, but if it shows up online before it's supposed to, people aren't going to look at that and think you made a mistake. They kind of are going to think, oh, there's a preview here, or maybe, it's just a work in progress kind of thing going on. So again, the rule of thumb for headlines, web headlines is, put something in there that's not going to embarrass you if it actually accidentally gets online. Absolutely do not put slugs in here, because those, to the reader, those look terrible. They don't look like anything that makes sense. So they'll definitely know you did something that you probably shouldn't have there. So you're going to have to fill out a web headline first at some point to even save it. So throw something in there that makes sense. And then the next step is we're going to move over to the metadata of our asset. So over here is kind of where we deal with the text of an asset and the headline and your byline. Over here, we've kind of got things that are about that asset that can be done, stuff the section tags and attaching child assets. But now we've added another tab in here because it's tied into the print side of things. So we've got a print tab. And as it might seem, nothing here has anything to do with web. None of this stuff will show on the web. None of this stuff has a tie to the web. It's all specifically for the print side of things. Ready for print is something that gets handled automatically as stories move through their workflow, so you don't really ever have to check that manually. Again, we're trying to automate as much as we can. We're trying to take any kind of tedious, clicks out of your hands. There are some things you must input manually, though, such as a slug. So we're going to talk about that next and dive into why that's important and why we've picked the convention, the naming convention that we have. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put an actual example slug in the slug field. Underneath it in the headline field, I'm going to use this as a place to show you the format of the slug. So this is not, I'm not typing a headline out here. I'm just sort of giving you what matches the slug so you know the formula of it, because maybe you have different section codes or you have a different, different descriptor on the end of it. So what we're going to do, and it might seem kind of non-intuitive at first, but once we talk about searching them, it's going to make a lot more sense. We're going to start with year first, and then we're going to do the month, and then we're going to do the day. So I think tomorrow is what, the 13th? Yes. So if I was writing a story for tomorrow's paper, it would be the 13th. Those of you who work on weekly or biweekly or semi-weekly or however often you publish, do note that the slug is always going to be the date of publication in print. So there's a disconnect from what you see in the slug date versus the start date and time. Start date and time is when you want it to go live on the website, which may be the day before it prints or even days before it prints in the physical newspaper. The slug is always going to be the day that it's going to appear in the newspaper. So keep that in mind, make a note of that. So then after we've got a date string, we're going to put some hyphen, because there's some rules about slug, like I was saying earlier, this got tacked on after the fact. And the funny thing is it actually helps it be more powerful when you search it. It gives you some tools to be able to find stories from any given day and any given section very quickly. But it does have some rules. And one of those rules is don't put any spaces in your slug. If you do that, then people will not probably be able to find it very easily, because they're not going to know that there's a space there. They'll have to, somehow know that there's a space and put a wildcard character to find it. So no spaces in your slugs. The next step is going to be what kind of section is it going to? And the best way to look at this is go ahead and spell it all the way out. Now, if you have arts and entertainment, you might want to consider shortening that one up, just because it'll be harder to read. Maybe you just make it arts. And maybe it's features, maybe it's, whatever it is, but go ahead and fill out that section the whole way. I'm going to pretend this is a news story, even though I've called it high school football. And then we're going to do one more hyphen followed by some kind of descriptor. And this is, football, East versus West. And you see, I don't have any spaces there. Now, if that's hard for you to read, you don't like that, my suggestion is to maybe use underscores where the spaces go, because then it's a little easier to read. So these are the three parts of the slug that we've set up here. And just underneath, I'm just going to give you like the code for it. So it's 2-digit year, 2-digit month, 2-digit day. Again, this is not a headline. I'm just using this field because it's right underneath it, so you can see it easily. And then you'll have a section code of some sort, and then a descriptor of the story. Now that is the slug. That is the whole part of the slug. I'm specifically saying that and being careful to say that because there are some things you can do after the slug that will make it easier for people to understand what kind of content it is, Also a way to maybe track the editing process if you are a site that has more than one person read it before it hits the page. This is something they do in Tucson a lot. You know, they actually still have a copy desk there, amazingly. And those folks, when they get done reading a story, they then throw their initials at the end. And you'll see I did put a space there, but that's because it's not part of the actual slug. That right there is the slug. Everything after it is just information that might be helpful to someone down the line. And so once we get to the search part of that, which we'll do probably after our break, you'll see why that is okay to do that at the end. And in reality, what's going to probably only be, you know, the most important part is really just up to here. Because most editors and most designers are going to be looking for content for a specific day in a specific section. They probably aren't going to punch in the exact descriptor. It's really just there for them to know what the story is without having to jump into it and spend a lot of time reading it. Yeah.
Can you clarify again, because that's on the print tab, that when we're talking about the date, we're focused on the print date rather than the web date?
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, the print tab, again, is only for print. You know, this date string right here is going to be the day of publication. Now, maybe you don't know exactly what day it's going to go. So there's things you can do to get around that. And it's just going to be, you guys are going to have to decide on your own what you like. One of the most common things is to, you know it's going to run this month. So maybe you just put X is where the day goes. But yeah, this is very, very specifically only for the print side of things. It has nothing to do with web. And this date string is always going to be a publication date for a physical paper. For those of you who are mostly daily or happen to be daily, you know, you're going to be doing this every day. For those of you who are working on semi-weeklies or 3 times a week, then you're only going to have a few that you'll deal with each week. All right, so that's our slug. Very important that you guys note how that works because it is the single most important and useful way to find stories. We do have some other stuff that we can do to find stories, and there are going to be some other things you tack on, especially those workflows that I've been touching on. But the slug is the single most important one to make sure you got that down. The last rule for them, you'll notice that the first rule was, of course, don't use any spaces. The last rule is all lowercase all the time. This is a case-sensitive search. If you decide you want to do this with your searches or with your slugs, and nobody's expecting that, when they run a search that looks for news with a lowercase n, they're not going to see your story. And then maybe they're calling you at home and bugging you while you're eating dinner and asking you where's your story. So do remember that you want them to be all lowercase. It could theoretically be all uppercase, but pretty much everywhere I go, everybody agrees it's harder to read that on a computer screen. Lowercase is a lot easier to read. So all lowercase, no spaces, and remember that the slug itself is just these 3 pieces: date, section, and description of the story. All right, so let's finish talking about the print tab here. We've got this ready for print that I told you about, and now we'll sort of jump into using the headline field properly. I'll take my little description or my little code out of it. So you might already be asking, well, why do we have 2 places to put headlines? Well, you may have a web headline that doesn't work for print. You may have a print headline that doesn't work for web. You're free up front to fill these both out if you'd like. You know, maybe the web headline is this, but I know the print headline is going to just be, you know, X's and O's because, you know, I want them to not even see this on the page. So you can fill that out if you want to. You don't have to, though. And I'm going to go kind of slow here because it's kind of non-intuitive how this works, but once you understand it, it should make some sense. So in order to make it so you don't have to fill this out every time, we're not going to ask you to fill 2 fields out every time, especially if the headline will be the same. That may not be something that happens frequently. You guys might have most of the time your headlines be different between the 2 mediums, but maybe they are the same. And so in which case, we're not going to ask you to fill them both. How it works is when the designer places it on the page, if there's something in the print headline field, that's what we're going to prioritize. We're going to place that. So if there is something here, it goes on the page over the web headline. We'll ignore this entirely. But again, to make it so you don't have to constantly be filling out all kinds of fields, if that suffices for your print headline, then when we bring it on the page, we'll use that. Now, once it's on the page, you know, and I haven't mentioned this yet, this is something I was going to get to, but I might as well introduce it now. Stories that are on an InDesign page also tie back to your Blox CMS. Any edits made on those will, when they save the asset, come back here. So through the natural editing process, You know, not only up front before it hits a page, but once it's on a page, any corrections that get made there are going to update the asset and update your web story. That's, again, trying to take some of that extra work out of your hands. You know, up till now, you probably had to go in and copy and paste, you know, any edits back into the web browser. No longer. Anything that's been placed out of our Blox system onto an InDesign page, those stories will update as they're edited on the page. And the designers can immediately commit a save to that story by doing a button in their InDesign interface that says save the content. So if there's something that's already live on the website and there's a major error and somebody sees the misspelled name, they can change that on the InDesign page, click save, and it'll update this side as well. And it'll go live on the website in 2 to 3 minutes.
But there are times when a story is going to be a lot longer on the web than in print. You have to trim a few graphs in print. So if you trim those, then it'll trim it from the web. Correct.
And this is something I didn't really get time yesterday to go through because I went too long on some other things. We have some tools in here that will allow you to essentially leave the content for web, but it'll hide it on the InDesign page. And we do the hiding on the InDesign page with a lot of stuff. For instance, you know, we're a web-first system. This is all HTML in the background. We're not going to ask you guys to learn HTML, but that's what it is. And when we place it on an InDesign page, it comes through as an HTML tagged plain text file. So we take the HTML and we use it to translate it into InDesign's language that then makes it look a certain way in InDesign. And that's kind of vice versa. One of the things we can do is we can hide things that are web only. Now, it may be that you've got an actual graph that you want to hide or a quote. And you can highlight that and use our print trim button from here, and it'll go into a little pink box with a scissor icon. And that means that will show up on your website, but it will not show up in InDesign. And it's a built-in function of InDesign that we leverage that allows you to hide text and not show it in there, but it'll still be there when it saves back. The other situation that pops up in is when you have a child asset, and we'll talk about this after our break. You may pull a child asset inline, so it's actually in the flow of your story. And it's also something that has no business in print, but it's actual HTML text. It's telling your website to show that. So we can hide that as well, and that actually happens seamlessly. You don't have to remember to click any buttons. So that's a good point to bring up there for sure. You can, your story may be 40 inches with great quotes, but you've only got 25 inches in your print. There's no reason to hack that thing down to nothing. You can actually just hide the pieces that you don't need for print because it won't fit, and it'll still be there for your website. And a lot of sites will actually do stuff like, you know, for a more, you know, for a longer story, you know, visit our website, and, you know, maybe you've got other stuff that couldn't fit in print that goes along with it. Do keep in mind that the ability to control that all up front gives you all that stuff to play with. So back over here, let's just to wrap it back around to the headline. Again, once you bring a web headline on the page, if there wasn't one already, when it saves back from the page, because that's, you know, how it's designed to work, then it will fill out this field over here because it's a print headline. We're not going to modify your web headline from the InDesign page itself with the actual physical headline that's on the page. Designers do have access to change the web headline if they go to save a story or check one in from the page. There's a different dialog that pops up and allows them to edit it there if they need to. And that does happen from time to time because maybe the headline was wrong or something there that needs to be updated. So again, this is not something people don't have to bounce back and forth all the time copying and pasting anymore. It's something that you can manage on the fly and in InDesign. You know, wherever you have an asset open, whether it's in InDesign or in this interface here, it's going to update your website if you hit the save button and it's live. So we've got slug, headline. The subheadline is a term that we use because it's, you know, it's the one that we knew when we set this up. Subheadlines could be called other things like summary graphs or deck, or, you know, there's various other terms out there. I've learned through my travels across this country that the newspaper industry has way more jargon than it needs, and it's different everywhere you go sometimes. You know, when I went to J school, I was told never use jargon in your stories, and then I got into the real world and started working in a newspaper, and everything was jargon coming at me. Lead and graph, and it's like, you know, does it really have to be with an F? Is it too hard to put the PH on there? You know, spelling out paragraphs. Anyway, you know, the subheadline is going to be your secondary headline that shows up generally underneath your main headline. Lots of times it's just in the first column, so that's what that one's for. You can fill that out up front, and if there's anything in these fields, when it gets to the InDesign page, it will create a text frame that has those in them, they'll actually style them in the style they're looking for. So, you know, don't worry too much about what you see here or how it looks, you know, physically looks here. The styling happens automatically in the InDesign side of things. So if a headline is placed, it's going to be a headline font. If a subheadline is placed, it's going to be a subheadline font. Jump keywords, you have access to that stuff here. You can fill that out as you go. If you guys use at your various publications, actually use a headline on your jump, you can fill that out here. So maybe it's a story about the president, and so you just have Trump as the keyword, and then, you know, something relevant to jump here. Now, if you don't use those, you can just leave it blank, and you're not required to fill any of this stuff out. It's all you know, your discretion. So you're not required to fill any of that out. Designers have tools on their page that they can fill out the keyword, and it'll automate that and style it and everything too. The notes field down here is simply internal communication between editors and reporters. You know, it's anything that you need to tell your editor or tell a reporter, you can throw that in here. It's also very good for communicating with designers, and this is something you'll want to make a note of if you're following along. If you type the word alert in this field and put a colon, anything you put after that will then show up as a box that pops in front of the designer when they place the story. So maybe, you know, this needs to be the top strip story. When they place it, that is going to throw a dialog box in InDesign that says, alert, you need to do this. And they'll have to click on it to get it to go away before they can interact with InDesign again. So it's a good way to get somebody's attention. At the same time, don't use it too often, because then they probably will start just clicking them, ignoring them. One thing we know for sure, anybody who's done anything with computers and user interfaces, the more boxes you throw at somebody, the less likely they are to read them. So you kind of want to be, use your discretion with that. So that's the only way to really get that to pop up in InDesign is to do that. Now, you could put other stuff in here too. It's really just internal communication. We do also have in the body copy the ability to do inline notes, which, you know, sometimes it's good to put a note here because, you know, maybe the whole story, the guy's name is William with one L. You know, L is right or proper, whatever. You know, then you don't have to go put an inline note out, you know, throughout the whole thing. But if you just got one graph that's got something, you know, this is right, really, you want to make sure that you're telling your editor what's going on. We've got another button in our row of icons that are all formatting icons here. You can click on that and it will put it in a green box. And now that's going to be hidden from both the InDesign side, the print side, and the website. So that won't print anywhere. It will be hidden text that you can only see, you know, here you'll see it in a green box. In InDesign, it actually engages the built-in notes mode. So there's a little icon that a designer could click on and they'll be able to see that note. But again, it hides it entirely. So there are two buttons here. We talked a little bit earlier about the trim from print one that will allow you to hide it from InDesign but still be there on the web. We also have this inline note option that will hide it from both. It's just, again, for internal communication. And if you've got a long story and you're talking about a specific part that you want to give a note about, it's harder to do that over here when you might have to say, oh, on graph 5 in the 5th word. So this is good mostly for general communication or something about, you know, designer, please do this. Whereas the inline notes are really more helpful to your editors as they read through a story and you need to clarify something, or, you know, CQ is the term that we used in Tucson at the Star. Every single name gets a CQ because early 2000s somebody had a rash of errors with names, and so they instituted this policy, and you could get written up if you didn't have CQs on your name. So
that actually started in the 90s.
Was it the 90s? Yeah, I wasn't sure when it started.
I was there. I'm just gonna, yeah, we're gonna take just a quick 10-minute break to give the folks in person to you know, take a break, grab a refreshment. Also for those of you on the call. So we're just gonna go ahead and mute and stop the recording. But we'll be back in 10 exactly.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. What paper you're from and what your role is?
Yes, I'm Dana Cole, and I'm a reporter by the
Awesome. Welcome, Dana. Thank you for being here. Great to see you, Mark. All right, we're gonna hand it back over to Dylan.
All right, let's hit it. Okay, so where we left off, we had just gotten done talking about the print tab. We've sort of gone over, you know, the basics of setting up an article right when you first start one. Again, just for those who are fresh to this, we didn't get too far into this. The web headline, you must have one to save the story at all. So you have to put something in that field. The rule of thumb for that is don't use anything there that could embarrass you if it accidentally gets posted online. My example was I've got a brief on my story about high school football that's not going to happen until later in the evening. And I want to get that going now. I don't want to wait and have to type that in later. So I can start my story now, and it's likely not going to go online, but if somebody accidentally puts it online, the headline I would put in there would be something, you know, like when the game starts, something very generic. So it doesn't have to be a good headline, doesn't have to be a great headline, but it doesn't, you don't want it to be anything embarrassing if it shows up. And absolutely don't put your slug over there. So we talked about slug a little bit, and all the fields we've got through here. The next thing in the print tab we want to discuss is something that really is going to come down to, you know, your own personal preferences. As I mentioned already, and I'll say it again, we have a billion different ways to do one thing. The slug is the most common way that folks will find stories, but we do have this other option down here at the bottom of our print tab called Publications. What this allows you to do is it allows you to assign a story, assign a story directly to a page. So if I click the add button, I get a little box that pops up and I get to pick the publication. Now, each site, you know, I'm on the My Herald review right now, each site will have its own set of codes here. And you may see more of them as we go further. Maybe there's a special section that gets produced every year and you want that to be in its own publication code or some kind of, you know, monthly magazine or something that gets put together. So it's important that you pick the right one. So if I'm writing a story for the Herald, I'm going to click on that pub code. The publication date is going to be, you know, when that's going to print in the paper. Again, we're in the print tab. So again, remember, if you're in the print tab, all of that is print only. There's nothing for web involved. The start date and time is the opposite of that. Start date and time is web only, nothing for print with start date and time. So I can pick my publication date, what section it's going in. If I know the page already, I know it's going to be an A1 story, I can plug that in, and I can also drop in the assigned depth or what I think the story is going to be, because if you do this early, obviously the story's not done yet, and maybe an editor wants to take a peek at it, read only, and look and see, you know, what you got going on here. And then also what this does is it gives your designers a tool so that if you guys have set this, you know, maybe it's the reporters that are doing it, more than likely it's editors because they are the ones assigning stories to pages. The designers will have a view in their version, the InDesign version of our assets queue that we're looking at here. They have an option to go to what we call a budget view, and that budget view will allow them to see all the stories assigned immediately. They don't have to search for them at all. Some sites swear by this and love it to death because then, you know, they can set this up front. It's searchable. You can look for stories based on publication date and our search terms back here. And then now you don't have to fill out page or even section. You could leave those blank if you wanted to. And then later somebody could add that. There's views in that same budget view to see stuff for an entire section. So it's not required to fill out the page. You do have to have a publication and a date, I think, are the only two that are required. But once I fill that out and I click the add button, let's say I want it to be, you know, I'm presuming it's going to be 20 inches or so. Then I get a little entry here in the publications tab. And you'll see immediately at the bottom there's something that wasn't an option in there. There was no place in there that you'd click something for place. That's actually whether it's placed on an InDesign page or not. And what will happen is, and we don't have any examples yet because we haven't actually placed any stories. We haven't gotten to that training yet for the designers. But anything that's on a page, the status will show you a little InDesign logo. So you'll be able to see at a glance that a story has actually been placed. And this, you know, this story itself, once it gets placed, if its publication information is there, it'll flip the no to yes. And, you know, let's say you decide you don't want to use that. You're just going to stick with using the slug. There's nothing wrong with that. Let me get rid of this whole thing. Let's do it again. Oh, there we go. Okay, so I keep getting my taskbar stuck, and I like it hidden. I don't like it in the way. So if you haven't filled this out, somebody places a story on a page, the system is going to generate this for you. So once the story gets placed, whether you've done it or not, something will end up in here. And if it's on a page, it'll say placed yes. If designers take a story off the page and save the page, then it'll go back to saying no. So there's a way to sort of control that and manipulate that. It's a pretty nice feature. Like I said, some sites use it exclusively. They don't do anything else really when they're searching for stories. That's what they do. Now everybody's still using slugs. I don't know of any site that doesn't use slug. but some of them are just using this publication on top of that. So that's our print tab. Pretty straightforward. Again, anything happening here, print only. So I'm going to run through real quick here all of the rest of our metadata about the story. And so, this is the area in which you're going to, create your content and deal with your actual body copy and stuff like that. Over here is where you do things that apply to that asset that maybe later on, have something down the line that matter. For instance, in the section tags, the tags field and sections where you'll see when you click on tags, it'll be the first thing that pops up. This is something that everybody will continue to do. Whatever you're currently doing for your stories on your website at your local paper, keep doing that. If you haven't dealt with this before, you'll probably get something from your editor who will tell you what you need to put in here. So again, that little plus icon is the let's add something that doesn't exist yet. And if you click add, then you'll get a list of all of your section tags. Now, the question came up yesterday. Some sites are not only picking, for instance, they're doing news national or, news, crime or something like that, but they're also picking the actual news label itself. Our websites are kind of designed such that you don't have to click this because anything that's underneath it will then get pulled into the main news site. And so this actually is a direct link to a direct tie into what your URL looks like. So if I come here and click news, kind of hard for you guys to see up on the screen here because the screen's kind of fuzzy, but those of you watching from afar can see it a little better. It actually puts /news there. So your section tags are actually filling out the rest of that URL. So if I click add sections, you see I've got both of these. Some of you are doing this. If you're not, and you're not asked to do that, again, just keep doing it how you're doing it. But it's not going to hurt anything to have them both there. The only thing to remember is that the one that is actually the landing location, the important one that fits that story best, is what you want to have on top, because that is something that Google looks at and when it's doing search engine optimization, stuff like that, trying to show your story above other publications that might be running similar stories. As also, you may be dealing with stories that have more than one place they go. If I've got a story that's a crime story, but it's also about a local athlete, a local high school athlete who robbed a store or shoplifted or something like that, you may also add in sports in there. It may be sports local or sports high school or maybe both of them. So you could have more than one in here. You could have as many section tags as you want. There's no limit. Again, what matters is what is most relevant to that story or needs to be at the top. So section tags, pretty straightforward with that. Keywords, keep using those as you have been if you're familiar with that. One of the nice features we have is this suggest button, which will read through your story and give you some suggestions. I don't have a whole lot going on here, so it's only picked out a couple. Once you select them, you can add those keywords, and you can also type them in manually, and you can create your own as you go. Maybe you've got a story about somebody who's never been in here as a keyword, and you want to add that person's name, and it didn't show up in the suggestion, Joe somebody, whoever it is right there. As you add them, it will create a list, and so you'll see if I start typing football or food, it gives you a list of all the different things that are already in there. And that's something that's managed by, probably Alessia manages those, I'm guessing. The keyword list. You probably don't, maybe you don't even look at them because some sites don't really care too much to manage them.
No, I mean, the editor.
Okay, cool. So the keywords, again, you'll use those, important for search engine optimization. Are you guys using keywords with a pound sign in front of them for anything? Okay, but it's not something they'll need to know? No. Okay, cool. All right, so the next thing down, geolocations, it's not something you guys are using, so we'll kind of skip that. It's just a way to tag, manually tag a location for a story. And it doesn't really necessarily tie to anything specific. It's not like your laptop's going to know where you are and tag it for you automatically. It's really just another way to, on your website, sort of set up certain things. I just want to quickly jump to somebody who's using that so you guys can see one of the places that uses it nicely. Galveston, Texas has communities part of their web page. And these are all and they just set these up manually and apply these manually, but they've got all these places that maybe they have a story that ties to that. So this little tiny town of Bay Cliff that's on the, the Gulf Coast there, wouldn't otherwise have their own paper or their own website, but any story that gets written that deals with Bay Cliff gets that tag and they get their own hyper-local little site there. So that's something to keep in mind if you ever decide to use it. That's what it's mainly used for. Sites is something that's mostly a total CMS the traditional way. You won't need to use it here, so you can skip sites altogether. Flags, if you're asked to use any specific flags, keep using them as you have been asked to use them. I'm just going to touch on a couple that are kind of important. Breaking is special. It will give you, usually we'll put, depending on what kind of template you're using for the website, but it generally will make a flag that goes across your website with a big breaking or new or something like that that will get readers' attention, and it's for true breaking news. If you select that flag, it's going to do that action, but it's also going to then post your story a little bit quicker. It puts you in a separate queue with other stories that have been assigned breaking, and it posts those a little bit quicker because we do appreciate that there are some stories that you really need to get up as soon as possible. And you know, when the system's really heavily loaded down, not applying breaking, it can take 3 or 4 minutes. Breaking usually cuts that down to a minute, minute and a half. But don't abuse it, because I think there's some kind of limit monthly. If you use it too much, then you can't use it the rest of the month. It resets the next month. Web only is the other one that's really handy that you probably weren't using before. What it will do for the print side of things is, let's say you've got photos, you get 30 photos that you've got with a story, and only 2 of them are for print. You already know what they want to be. If you click web only on any asset, and this is really only specific to stuff that are child assets. You wouldn't do it on an article because you're placing articles on the page and child assets come along with it. But if you have a bunch of photos, you can tell them all of them but 2 to be web only, and the InDesign page will then not try to bring them on automatically. Now, designers have control over what photos come on a page with the story. But if you've got a list of 30 of them, and by default it's saying bring them all on, then they have to go in and deselect all the ones that they don't want. And that can be tedious, and they could forget and get the wrong one. So web only is a good way to change that. And what it does, it doesn't block them from placing it. Maybe they decide they need another photo and you don't mind them using another one. You just were only told there was space for 2. Now they can still choose to interact with that and tell it to place. It's just by default it won't. The web only will tell child assets that are connected to stories to not try to place by default. So it's a real good thing to use to keep your designers sane, especially since they're dealing with so many different publications. It's something you'll want to make a note of. All right, so tagging, pretty straightforward. I am going to sort of bounce back over and talk about start date and time in relationship with tags, and also the relationship with the do not publish. So because this is now a system that also ties for print, you're not simply taking a story that maybe has already been edited and created and posting it right away online. There's going to be stories that start in our system and get saved early in the day and then don't get posted until after 5 p.m. when the editor finally reads it and gets to that stage it needs to be to. So there's a couple of things to remember on how does stuff go live on your website based on the controls you have over this. And this is something every reporter is going to have upfront control over, and every editor can then modify or change as it goes through that process. So we talked about start date and time. That's kind of the when. When is it going to go live on the website? So you can schedule that really whenever you need to. Maybe you don't change it at all, and the editors is the one that change it for you. But it is important to note that if you started a story at 8 a.m. and it's going live at 5 p.m., somebody's going to need to update that start date and time, because if it's 8 a.m. and you get to a landing page that it might be visible on, go back here real quick for the example I have here. So maybe this list of latest breaking news, there's only 3 items showing here. Maybe that's all it's showing. There could be 3 other items that are ahead of the one that you want posted at 5 p.m. because these are sorted by start date and time. A lot of these blocks, and that's the reason the system is called Blox. There's a block here, and you can tell it to bring in bits of content. This is another block. This right here is one big block. And on the back end that's controlled by your digital team, they tell it to pull in stories with this feature or that feature. So again, the start date and time is important to get that actually when you want it to really be live. Because it will go live whenever it gets the other pieces we're about to talk about, but the start date and time being too far back might make it so it's not visible where you want it. So start date and time is the when does it go live. The section tags are the where does it show up. Now, if you have no section tags on here, but the start date and time is passed and the do not publish button is not checked, it will be on your website. It just won't be visible on any of your pages. Somebody could theoretically do a search up here. Where's my search? Right here. And if they found the right terms, they could see that story. It would be technically live on the site. It just doesn't have a where. So that's one thing to keep in mind. It actually is a nice little buffer you know, if you don't have section tags on it right away and that's the last thing you add, then if it does accidentally get posted, then it won't be on a site in a half-done state. That's kind of where the difference between using it for print and web and just web comes in. You know, if you're using it just for web, you probably are copying and pasting from another place, or you've already typed it all out. But on the print side of things, reporters are going to be saving frequently and updating a story. It could be a few hours. And obviously, if that goes live in the middle of that, then you're kind of giving the public how the sausage is made situation, and you don't really want them to see that. So the where and the when are two controls for it, and the final control for that is going to be your do not publish button. This is the overall kind of toggle of on and off. Is it visible to the public or is it not? So you may have a start date and time that's already passed, so it's, you know, would be live on your site then, and it might have a where. It might live on one of these pages. Do not publish is going to make it visible or not visible overall, though. And that actually is going to segue into our workflows, which I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about here because it's sort of the way all this stuff gets automated. So right now, in the tab called Other, I like to say that as opposed to Other tab because then people are like, which other tab? The other tab. Well, which other? The only other tab. The tab called Other. If you come down a little bit here, you'll see there's a workflow option. And now, generally, nobody's going to come here and click on this. It's pretty rare that you come here and make a change in this part of the asset itself. There's another way to handle moving it through these workflows, but I want to discuss what's happening in these workflows and what they are. So the workflow, again, is the process, the path by which a story goes from some state of creation through an editing process to a final state of doneness. So every story that gets created is going to, by default, if you've set your button up here to be default workflow, it's going to start in progress. And if you have in progress checked, then do not publish will stay checked. So that means any save you make will not show up live to the public. Going back here to the workflow, there's multiple stages. We've got the first edit stage, and that's what, when a reporter is done, they'll move it to that stage. And I'll tell you how that happens in a minute. Because again, you're not going to come here real often to this part. And then that can change some things. That's not going to change anything at this point. Do not publish remains checked because that's still a state where an editor is currently reading it. It's not edited yet. Then if you go back down to workflow and you change it to second edit, at this point, you're going to see a change. So I'm going to click at the second edit. I go back and look at miscellaneous, and it is automatically taking that do not publish off. So now it's going to be available for your public to consume. And the print tab actually will get the ready for print box automatically checked at that point too, so your designers will know, okay, this is ready to get put on a page. So again, like I've said a couple times, you're not going to come to this part and change it because when you do a save on the asset down here in the bottom right, click the little arrow, you get the option to promote it to the next stage, save it and close it all at the same time. So you're not going to spend a lot of time going to workflow. You're going to write your story, and you're going to come down here and click the little save button arrow. Now, again, like our other buttons we've talked about, if you just click the button, that's just going to save. Boom, you made a quick save. But if you click the little arrow, you get a menu, and the save without closing is the default. That's why it's bold. And then the save and close is an option, and that's what a reporter would do if they're not done with the story, and they're going to come back to it later. They're leaving to go to an interview, or they're going to eat lunch or whatever. You know, they're not going to promote it or do anything like that. They're going to click save and close. And it is important not to leave stories open when you leave the building for, you know, my kind of thing is, you know, don't leave a story open any longer than you are going to go get a cup of coffee or use the restroom or go talk to a colleague for a few minutes. Because that's the kind of situation where you could forget about it, leave it open. Somebody needs to get to it later, and then they're in the situation where they have to decide whether to unlock. And they may be calling you at home and asking you questions while you're eating dinner and things like that. And I don't know about all you guys, but when I was a reporter, my goal was to get that thing as absolutely perfect as it possibly could be before I left, because when I'm done, I don't want anybody calling me home. So again, save and close is for that. The promote the first edit, I'm not going to click that because then it'll close and I'll have to reopen it. But that's going to then move it up to the next stage, and it's the same as if you were to come here and manually click this. And then an editor, when they pick it up, are going to get different options. They're going to get the ability to promote it up to the next level, but they can also demote it back to the in progress. Because maybe there's a, you know, some major question that needs to be resolved by the reporter, or maybe there's something that needs to be rewritten because it, you know, didn't make sense or whatever. So they can demote it back to that level, and what's going to happen is it's going to toggle these buttons based on that stuff. So again, if I'm in second edit and a designer places it on a page, and they decide, That's what I want. Do not publish unchecked. The designer decides to demote it back, then it's going to go ahead and slap that do not publish on it again, pull it off the web, and then the editor can address whatever it is. And they can do that from the InDesign page. They do not have to bounce back and forth between the two. There's a lot of stuff you can do from within InDesign that also has control over these functions. So workflow, again, is a process that it goes through. It does some automation. It's what's going to actually send something live on your website. The idea is that it's seamless. Just as things naturally go through, the right things happen at the right places, and you don't have to sit there and manage every bit of it manually. I like to always refer to mental stress throughout a day. The more mental stress and the more you have to sit and focus and think about something, the less time you have to do things, and two, the more tired you're going to be at the end of your day. So not having to think about, do I have to make this go live? Do I have to click the right button? I'm trying to automate that stuff will give you a little bit less of that mental stress throughout your day is the idea. Now you will come here and make some changes sometimes because there's going to be a time when your story is truly print only. You don't want it to appear on the website for one reason or another. Maybe it could be skyboxes. That's skyboxes promos on the cover of a page or on the cover of a section that point inside to something else. They don't have a place on the web because they're talking about, see a story on page B5 if it's a sports story or whatever. So you may come in here and make it a print only, and you're going to notice it's exactly the same as print and web. It's just when you get to the second edit and ready, the do not publish remains checked, but it will still check that ready for print. So the designer's looking for, ready for print doesn't do anything except give a little flag, like a little icon that they can see on a story that just says, hey, this is in your queue, you can place it now. It's just a visual thing. But yeah, so the workflows have a little bit of difference between them in terms of what they're doing at those stages, but they all have the same stages in them. And as you guys go through, some of you may not need 4 stages. It may be first in progress, edit, and ready. So that's something we can change after the fact. This is not hard and fast. These are all arbitrary, in fact. You guys may decide as a company you want different names here. That can be changed very easily by anybody who's got admin access to the back end settings of this stuff. So workflow, again, really, really important that you know how it works, but generally you're not going to interact with it unless you need to move it from, where it's going to end up. Print only, web only, or print and web. Most stories are going to be print and web, so that's where we're going to start. All right, back to we talked about tags. We've talked about the when and the where and the how does it go live. Let's now move on to our child assets and connecting other stories to your article, stories and photos and whatever it might be. So the first thing to note is the child assets one pops up at the top. And the relationship between a parent asset and a child asset, maybe not real intuitive because it's kind of a computery kind of term, but you can think of the articles as almost always being the parents. On any print publication, the article is the meat and the potatoes of what you're doing. And it may have pieces attached to it, but they all go with it. So if I come to the website, it's pretty rare that I'm going to see a true standalone photo just hanging out in these spaces. These are almost always stories that are getting clicked on. They're going to show the art based on whether or not there is a child asset. And in fact, whatever your top photo is on that asset is generally what's going to show in these preview windows. So if I want to add one, I've got some options. First, I can find an asset that may already exist in your system. And by clicking Find Assets, I get a little window that pops up that looks exactly like our main searches. And it allows you to find a photo of some sort and add it, and now you've got a photo attached. And again, if you've got multiple photos, the one that's on the top is going to be the one that shows here. It's also going to be the order in which they appear on your story, both in print and online. So if you are online looking at it, at the top of the story, you've got a photo, maybe it's a slide kind of thing where you click an arrow or you can actually swipe it on a phone. The order in which you place those here is going to be the order top down or left to right when you're doing that. Same for InDesign. Whichever one you put at the top is going to be the first photo that comes on that page, and then everything else is going to flow in order beneath that for your designers. So that's one way to get them, is to find them. You can also go to your syndication channel, which will allow you to, and I'm going to jump in there now because it's a good place to talk about it. The From Syndication allows you to look at other websites in your company, and that's what all these are: Anchorage, Argus, the Arizona Range News, Cap Journal, and Pierre, and Alaska. We've got everybody in here. So the idea is you can come and look at, for instance, we'll look at Benson. I'm on the Herald Review, but I'm looking at Benson content. I can come in here and I can do slug searches for content if I already have a copy of their budget and I know there's a story I want to steal from them. I can, just look for stories based on however, and then you've got the option to take these and make them a part of your CMS. So syndication is looking out to somebody else's content, and it's really just a list. These are not currently actual assets. If I double click on it, you see I don't actually get the ability to edit anything. I have kind of a limited, I don't have the tabs across the top. There's some things I can do here, but it's just a preview of what's there. Now, if I go ahead and add this to the site, if I say import and add, and I tell it to add to site, well, then I'm going to get a little checkbox on my status. It's going to tell me that it says the asset has been added to site. And then once I click add to asset, now it's actually a real asset that I have copied down from the, where did I get that from? I think I got that from Benson. So I copied that from Benson's Blox CMS over to this. And that's how it's going to work for all you guys who are, editors especially are going to be doing this. Probably not so much the reporters, but the editors are going to know there's a story that another sister paper is using that you're going to want. They're going to use that function once they know that that story has been edited to the level that it's free to use. You guys will be able to grab that and pull that in. So again, it started out as not an asset, but we pulled it down and made it an asset. Okay, so one more thing I want to talk about images real quick here too, because you're dealing with those as children a lot. So again, it's a nice place to talk about it. Image assets generally are going to have a high resolution part to them. So how it works is you don't have to worry about the size of your photo when you put it into our system generally. There are some, like Washington Post moves these insanely huge, like billboard-sized images that literally can be too big for our system. But that's rare. That's really the only service we deal with that. And most of the time you take a picture with your camera or your phone, it's going to be, even if it's a large, it's got a lot of resolution on it and a lot of pixels on it, it's still going to fit in our system. You're not going to have to do anything to change those either for print or for web. You guys just need to upload the one that you got. Maybe you like to take it into Photoshop and clean it up a little bit. Do all you need to do to it. But once you upload it into the system, and I'm going to cancel out of this and actually do that part, because I can say from here, this is finding stuff that exists somewhere. This is going to be creating stuff that's brand new. I want to add an image as a child, which is something a reporter would most likely do, as opposed to going and finding another one that's out there somewhere. I'm just going to grab the photo that I found, and I'm going to upload it straight up. I'm not going to try to worry about making it sized for web or any of that stuff. This one, I don't know if it's got a high res. It doesn't, but because it's really a tiny little web image I grabbed. I just like a cute cat, and some people in the audience tend to like it too. So there would be a high res image here available. Now, how this works is once you upload the photo, for the web, it creates a series of previews that fit all the various parts of your website and the sizes. So this one's like your big centerpiece one. That's a specific size, and every asset will get a preview that fits that in case it gets used here. Same for this one, and then even smaller. And if you actually click on the story, then you're going to get a larger one that fits across the top. So that's another preview. It doesn't actually do anything or ever change the high-res image because we don't want it to be affected by anything else that happens. There are two places it gets used. First, for your website, people can buy that image. They can click a buy button, and they can get it from you that way by spending money with you. And you want to give them a high-res at that point because maybe they want to make it into a billboard or a poster. Then the other one is going to be for the print side of things. We just take a copy of the high-resolution image and we drop it into a folder InDesign program links to, and it's no longer tied whatsoever to this. And I actually like to call, now that you're using Blox Total CMS, I actually like to call them cut line assets that happen to come with an image, because the caption is actually the asset when it gets placed on a page. That text needs to write back if there's an edit made to it. So that's how we can track this stuff. We actually, the caption itself is the part that is the asset, and we just take a copy of that high-res image. So for instance, if it's going to be a black and white photo for print, but it's a color image to start, you don't have to make it black and white up front, and you don't want to. The web does full color. You don't need to make it black and white. Now, sometimes you'll have a real black and white because it's a scanned image from the 1920s or something. Not much you can do about that, and then that actually is fine because that's the actual native image. But if you've got something that's going on a black and white page, but it's color, you don't need to worry about that, because when we place that on the page, it's a copy of the high-resolution image. It doesn't have any connection whatsoever to the image itself. So from there, then your designers can make it be whatever it needs to be, whether it's CMYK or grayscale.
Dylan, can you take this opportunity just to remind folks how they can customize a thumbnail image for the website? You know, so that we don't. I know Alessia and Ian really emphasize this in training, but I don't think we can emphasize this enough so that we don't end up with the automatic crop, you know, in the torsos on the homepage and things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. So here's the question, because I deal with this very little. Is that something that you can do from just image, or do you have to go to preview? Okay, so you'll do it here. Okay. So in the preview field here, you get the option to crop a photo. Now this isn't going to affect the high-res image on the InDesign page at all. It's not going to affect the high-res image at all. It's just going to affect the way that the previews look on your landing pages, essentially. Yeah, so sometimes you might have a very horizontal photo that just doesn't look right, or it gets cut off or something like that. So you have the option to set a crop on it. Now in this case, it's already kind of a mugshot, but you know, if I want to, I can click on it. I get the actual image itself. That's, you know, that preview there, and I can click on the crop region. Then I can, you know, if I'm doing something artistic for the web, you know, the cat's eyes and face, because that looks kind of cool. Then you can click OK, and now that's what's going to show in your preview. And you can undo that. You can say remove crop region. You know, go back. You know, this stuff is flexible here. And again, that's only for your website, so that it shows right in the various pieces that you got. So whatever, you know, whatever kind of instructions you get from your digital team, just follow those. But the idea, again, is going to, you know, put it so that it looks nice. That's the idea, so that it's not going to get cut off or something like that. And that ties a little bit into the next part I want to talk about, which is your presentation mode on an image. These have various options that you can use for the website, and none of this stuff, except for mugshot, really does anything for print at this point, although we could leverage it for print down the road if there's a reason to. Mugshot, what that's going to do for both print and web, it's actually going to make that image not be a giant, huge image. By default, anything that you put in that's got a presentation of none, when it comes on the InDesign page, we just make it, you know, whatever full size it is, and it sets it inside the story frame at a size based on how big the story frame is. But if you want a true mugshot, that's going to be, you know, half a column by that big. You don't want to ask your designers to have to go manipulate that after the fact. It's really a pain in the butt in InDesign to take a large photo and get it down to a small size. So you do absolutely want to make mugshots that are true mugshots a mugshot. Now, you can get around for the web. Let's say you have a photo that's not really a mugshot and it's a full body. You can upload that here, come to your preview, and set the crop so that you actually make it a mugshot. You know, maybe you want to be a little tighter on this for your website, whatever. Then when it gets on the page, it'll be a mugshot size. And when you get it on the and you get into the web side of things, it won't take the whole giant photo and make it squashed down to a mugshot size. Because if you do that, you're trying to get somebody's face as a mugshot out of a larger photo. Well, then you're not getting that. You're just getting it squashed down. So keep in mind that you can use the preview to crop an image down so it is a mugshot for the website. Now on the print side, it could be any photo with a face in it, because in the InDesign program, they can move that around and enlarge the photo inside the frame so that it makes it a mugshot. So the rule of thumb, you do want to use this for sure, because it's going to make everybody's lives easier. It also looks very nice on the web if you have a mugshot. It won't put a person's face at the top as some giant setup here. It's going to put it down in here. I don't know if this actually is set. It doesn't look like it was set as a mug here. But the mugshots are generally inset somewhere on the left, or maybe it depends on your web template. But it makes it a mugshot for the web too. So instead of getting a giant face staring at you at the top of the page, you get an actual, you know, mug. And then again, you can combine that. If you don't have a true mugshot, you can combine the presentation mode with your preview that you should be doing already anyway to make that be a mugshot for the web. Does that make sense what I'm saying there on that? You might have a full body and you need to get that cropped down. For the print page, it doesn't really matter because they can manipulate it on the page. But you don't want to set a photo of a full body as mugshot without cropping it. Otherwise, that whole thing gets squashed down and you can't even see the person's face. Sure.
He's asking, are designers now going to be responsible for putting print and grade and
so has Williston been doing that there for the folks here? Because the idea is that, yeah, the designers will handle that and that people shouldn't have to worry about it. But there are some sites that maybe have a photographer on site, or maybe they're at a press that's not local and they know their press better. they can still do that.
Okay.
The way that needs to be done, though, is you would upload the RGB, the regular one, in here, like we're doing right now. And if you have a print color photo, CMYK toned or black and white toned, then you can use this other option to upload a second photo that is toned properly. And how it works is when it gets to the InDesign page, if there's something uploaded into this, and it's the same idea, upload a file, grab your CMYK one for the black and white, upload a file, grab your black and white one. The InDesign program will see that those exist and it'll place those on the page instead. So there is a way to do that if they insist upon it. But the idea kind of is generally that they don't have to worry too much about it. So
yeah, maybe give Jamie an opportunity to see if Jamie, do you want to clarify or respond? Yes.
Can you hear? Did you hear what he said, Jamie? We were asking, did you have any more questions on that one, or do you have anything more you want to say there?
I'm trying to. I'm not sure. I don't think you guys can hear me.
Oh, I can now. I don't think I could a minute ago, but I can hear you now.
Right. We were under the understanding, like we were told that we had to convert the photos to CMYK. That central pagination would not do that.
Oh, okay. That's not something I'm aware of.
I'm going to speak up on that. That was the previous directive.
Okay.
They're supposed to do their own.
So I guess that's, yeah, I mean, if that's how the company wants that and that's what they want to continue to do, keep doing that. But that may also be a discussion you guys might want to have going forward, because it's very easy for the designers to do it from a page. Might not have been so easy before. So I don't know if that's something that, did you mean that they have said that's how you want to do it going forward, or is that just how you guys have been doing it?
How we've been doing it, but when we moved over to central pagination a couple of years ago, we were told specifically that if the photos weren't converted to CMYK, they would run as RGB. Like the designers just did not have anything to do with that. They just placed the photos on the page.
Jamie, we're going to take note of that as a follow-up item with you, and Manuel and you know, Bethany and all of us can follow up, and then we'll share that information with the rest of the team as well. Because you know, Dylan, as you said, if this is, you know, creating an efficiency related to there may be an opportunity to revisit that policy. Again, the whole intention is let's put the workflow responsibilities in the hands of the person who's best in position to do it the most easily. So we don't want to put more things on, you know, design tasks on editors and reporters if we're able to make it possible for the designers to do it easily.
And it may well be, you know, that may well be the most efficient way for your designers too, so that they don't have to worry about it. If you've already been doing it and you've got people on site who know your press that's close to you, you know, and that may be just something I just missed in the original setup that I did here when I was talking to Bethany. I was under the impression that they were going to be doing it. But again, you know, if that's more efficient, again, what Sean said, that's what you want to go with. Whatever is easiest on the entire workflow, whether that's handling it at your local locations or having them do it. But the way to do it is pretty simple. You know, you upload the regular RGB, and then you take any tone photos and you use this print option here to do the color or black and white.
But we'll follow up. Thanks for bringing it up, Jamie.
All right, so back here to our images, you still do have to have a title on them. You don't generally have to mess with start date and time or tags on these, though, because they go along for the ride with the parent. And that's kind of my analogy, is that the article is the parent and it's driving the van, and it might have 10 children that are all in the van with it. Those children are going with that parent. So you don't generally have to take any child assets and do too much with them. Now, there may be cases where you're asked to, or you know, something that I'm not aware of on my end that you guys are doing, where you want to have the start date and time on these set. So don't change what you're doing if you're already doing stuff to it, because there's a reason for it. But generally, most sites don't mess with that stuff too much, because unless it's a true standalone, some kind of asset that's on its own, it's going to go along with the story wherever it goes. So that's one thing to keep in mind on that. And then if there was a high-res image, you can actually get to it here too. So if there's an image that's in your system and it has a high-res attached to it, there's a view button that'll open in another asset. And let me go look at this one. I'm just going to ignore that one. Let's see if Dan Snyder's got a high-res. No, some of them come from the websites, don't, but I don't have an example. But you could get to the high-res from that. So then back to our child assets here. Did anybody have any more questions about images at all? Any of you guys remote or anybody here? Okay, feels like a pretty straightforward outside of that question of how that's going to get handled with your toning. All right, so child assets. We've got all kinds of options. There's one I specifically want to talk about. You know, audio could be, the one I want to talk about in detail is going to be HTML. I'm just going to run through the rest of them because it's all pretty straightforward. Audio is if you've got something you recorded on your phone, that you've got an audio file, you can upload that directly. You get a copy of a 911 tape from the Sheriff's Department or something like that. You can upload that directly. We now have the capability to upload computer files, such as, you know, like a program. Maybe you guys have created a program that's designed to help people do their taxes or something like that. That's something that can be attached to a story these days, create an asset. Nobody's really using Flash. I'm going to skip HTML because that's one that's going to be very handy to you. Link assets are a way to connect, you know, just another story to this story or any other link out there. It just essentially, it's a print-only thing, web-only thing, and it just creates a little box that's got a link, and it's generally used by, to, you know, just have a secondary link to another story. So that's there, not super frequently used by reporters. PDFs, along with your images and tables, are all print and web items. So if you attach a PDF, it might go on the page. If it's a 100-page court document that you want to give to your readers to read on the website, you're going to want to make sure you make that one a web-only flag, because you don't want that to get placed or accidentally get placed on the InDesign page, because really large PDFs can take a while to get onto the page. So keep that in mind. PDF works for both, along with images. Tables are also for both. Tables are very nice. You could actually upload an Excel chart directly into it, and it'll give you a nice tabbed chart in InDesign that we automatically set up and tab, that the designers don't even have to do anything with. It just comes through in the right style, and everything's lined up nicely. They may have to fiddle with it a little bit to get it to look exactly how they want. But a table asset's a real handy thing. And then on the web, it gives you a chart that's sortable. It's got, you know, the columns and stuff that'll be on it. I'll go ahead and open this up. You could manually add columns and rows, but you could also then use an import function to import an Excel file. Very handy for like school honor rolls, dean's lists, anything you get that's in an Excel format that you want to put in the paper on the web. You have a really nice tool to handle that. So that's another one I wanted to talk about. I'm just going to cancel out of that. The poll is something that can be interacted with by your end users. Video is specifically for actual video files that you have uploaded. We have the ability to handle YouTube as well, so you can take a YouTube link and that will make an asset that will give a video for your site. Some sites like that because it's free, it's easy. Other sites don't like it too much because at the end of the video you get random watch this next, which could take your viewer away from you and down some hole in the YouTube world. So, you know, be careful about using that one if that's a concern. Can you change that setting?
Yeah, so we encourage that we use YouTube in that video.
Okay.
To count his bandwidth that he charges on a monthly basis. To try to get away from that, we use YouTube. Yeah, and then you can keep setting up to not allow the videos to show.
Is that something that's in here, or when you?
No, you have to do it when you're supposed to use it.
Okay, gotcha. Okay,
Yeah,
so you guys are using YouTube. Great.
And I just want to stay closer to the speaker for those remotely. Lesia was just reminding everyone that we do encourage everyone to take advantage of YouTube due to bandwidth issues with, you know, hosting, and that there is a setting in there so that you don't necessarily have to show related videos. In fact, it's better to not do that because we don't know what the affiliation is. I think to Dylan, your point, the point is if you're including a YouTube video from a news perspective that we don't have control over, but I would say, you know, the news value certainly outweighs whatever rabbit hole it might go down.
Cool.
You know.
Yeah, I agree with that entirely. I think it's a great tool. It's very, very easy to use. If you're on you're on your actual YouTube page, you just copy the URL like I'm doing here, take that into your asset, and there's a set video button, and you drop that right in. And it's going to bring over description and title and based all that stuff. You've got it.
We are working on initiatives on the sales side to be able to, you know, start to do some monetization, some sponsoring of videos. But until we're at that point, it doesn't really justify, you know, us incurring bandwidth costs to your, you know, newspaper for that. So the YouTube alternative is a very good one for the moment.
Yep. And that's a pretty common spiel I give when I'm talking about the asset types. A lot of sites do not use video simply because there's a lot of money involved with storing those and streaming those over our storage setup. I don't know, are you guys aware of Field 59?
Yeah, we've had conversations with Field 50, and Field 59, I think, is going to be a nice option. Yeah. Problem is we really need to have the sales strategy in place in order to justify the expense related to it. Yeah.
We have another, for those of you remotely, there's another thing. It's actually a company we were partnered with and we have since bought. Town News now owns that. And it's like a YouTube just for news organizations, so you don't have to deal with all of the Google stuff. And it's got some simple editing tools. Just be aware that that's out there. So for now, YouTube is where you guys will go with your videos. You'll upload them to YouTube. You'll create YouTube assets out of them, and that's a real smooth, very easy thing to do.
Make sure that we add sections to them.
To videos.
To the YouTube videos.
Yeah, so what Alessia said is to make sure to add sections to YouTube videos. There's nothing worse, the ones that we locally upload, there's nothing worse than someone spending a lot of time shooting video, uploading it, in many cases even editing video, and then nobody sees it.
So is that
falls in the forest.
The multimedia tag? Or is there?
Yes, some have this media, some have videos.
So be aware that your YouTube assets absolutely need to have some tags on them so they show up in the right place on the website. Because that is one thing that does more than an image or a PDF. That is something that can be standalone. It doesn't necessarily have to be a child asset. Videos are in and of themselves, you know, a lot like articles. They can drive an entire section of your site. All right. So the one that I do want to talk about back here and related in a little bit more detail. I'm glad that I touched on YouTube though, because yeah, that's lots of sites are using it and lots of sites aren't. And so the HTML asset is a really, really handy tool. Actually, let me get out of here because I'm in my YouTube asset here. Go back to my article. I just went down a rabbit hole that's easy to get down. You add an asset as a child, like an image. You might find yourself trying to add another one, except you're adding it to the image. Be careful that you do each asset one at a time. So I clicked on related, added a new one. I've got a second window up here. You see this one I'm floating. I want to make sure that I'm done with this and I click save and close before I add something else. Because if you add a child to a child, then that's not going to show up on your InDesign page. It won't show up on the website in the right place.
Does make it a grandchild?
We had to make it we could make it more complex. We really could. Don't tempt them.
Yeah, right.
So a lot of you guys are probably already familiar with or have used the ability to embed like a Twitter. Well, Twitter's actually got one built in, and you guys are using YouTube. So this is really more for the odd duck that's out there. If you have a video from a site that's not YouTube that you want to place, because it could be Vimeo, it could be Instagram. Some of the stuff that doesn't already have a built-in function. Twitter and YouTube being so big, we actually support those very well. But let's say that you've gone to Instagram. I don't know if I have to be logged in to do this. We'll find out soon enough.
It might be challenging to be logged in through.
I'm just going to use Twitter because it's easy. Just as an example here, you can go to a tweet and you can generally find an embed option. Now this is again Twitter. You can do automatically from within our system. I'm just using this as an example of an embed. Any kind of content that has an embedded, card of some sort, something that looks really nice on your website and official. Anything that's got an embed, you can use this for, and you want to do it the way I'm about to do it. So I'm going to do the embed tweet. It's going to throw some code up there. Now that's really ugly on this projector. I think the projector sometimes looks nice and sometimes doesn't.
We've determined it's your PC.
It can be actually. So once I've got that embed code, I do not want to use this little film icon that says insert embedded media player widget. So if you're using this now, stop using it until they fix it on our end. What happens is the code that gets dropped in there shows up on your InDesign page. And you do not want a designer to see this because the first thing they're going to do is cut it out of there. They're going to say, somebody messed up, and they're just going to delete it. And then your embedded video or your embedded Twitter card or whatever it is you've got in there is gone. So what we do instead is, it seems like a more roundabout way, but it gives you more control over it anyway. The HTML asset is how you'll handle that. Do more editorial. HTML, again, we're making child assets here, so I'm not just making this outside in the general area. And I'm going to paste that into my HTML block, and then I'm just going to give it a title, Twitter embed example that I used. And then once I do a save and close on that, I'm done. So it's really pretty simple. It's maybe another click or two than that, but it's pretty quick. And then once I've got that, then I can drag that in line, and it can be wherever I want it to be in my story. So maybe I've got, you know, a bunch of graphs here. Ooh, not what I wanted. I tried to copy this. I've got, you know, a bunch of stuff in there. I can actually drag this around, and I can change how it looks on the website by clicking the display properties and editing that. You say I need it to be left or center or right, and that ties into the presentation mode of a story. You guys are probably already using long form. It takes the ad stack on your page, on your web page, and moves it down to the bottom, gives you the full width of your page, and it makes, you know, the images nice and big, and it's that, you know, really used for big, nice feature stories or enterprise stories that need a special display. On that note, don't use it too often because things you get used to often aren't special anymore, at least in design. The personality is a way to do like a columnist, so that your web page that you're looking at with a story on it will have at the top right, it'll have a little box right here and a person's name and a little bio. It doesn't really change anything other than that. So those are your two presentation modes. You know, use those as you've been told to use them. So let's now move along to sibling assets. The only thing that this really gets used for by most sites is to just tie two stories together. If you make an article a child asset, if you don't flag it web only, it's going to try to pull it on the page, and that could actually change things in your story because we're going to translate it from HTML to the InDesign language. And if it's not something you meant to go on there, it's a story that was on your website yesterday, it could end up changing how that looks when it gets saved on the page. You really don't generally want to have articles be child assets unless there's a reason that your digital team has told you to do that. Sibling assets allows you to do the same thing, and instead of having any tie with the print system, it simply makes a link on both stories and you can get to the other one. So it ties two stories together for your web to have a link between them. Parent assets in an article, you probably won't come here because you're not going to make this a child of something. But if I go to my Dan Snyder photo and look at its parent related tab, you see it's connected to multiple stories here. And so this is nice for a photographer who might want to connect one photo with a few different stories for whatever reason. That's something you do on the web more than you do in print for sure. There's limited real estate in print, not so much on the web. So you can connect the same, you know, it could be a mugshot or something that goes on 4 or 5 different stories. They can come in here and add those stories to the photo going backwards, and it's a lot fewer clicks. If I wanted to add from 5 different assets, add one photo to 5 different articles, and I open each article, I've got to go through a bunch of clicks to get that in there. Whereas if I'm on the image itself, I can come in and just find the stories and add them here. So it's just going backwards. And so you're never going to use the parent assets tab really in the article. It's only going to ever happen if you're looking at an image, and it's mostly photographers that are doing that or digital people. Links makes a quick link on your website, has nothing to do with print. Just puts a little box in there. A lot of the time that's used for, like, you know, donate to the Red Cross for this disaster that happened. You know, you don't necessarily want to type that up as a graph at the bottom of the story because people may never get that far, or it may be that you have a great story and you don't want to have this random, here's how to help in there. So you can have that be a separate link. Comments, anybody who's dealing with that, that's the same as you guys will deal with it. And then related content. This is the one that has a tie both for print and web. There's one thing about this right now, it does not write back from the page. I was telling you on the InDesign page, anything you do there will save back and update. Anything except a related content box. That's going to change in the next year to 2 years. It's going to actually, the related content options that are here, all these different types of boxes that have different things on your web template that it matches, those are going to become child assets. So they're going to actually get added through this way. And that's because we currently don't actually physically have a way. There's no possible way for us to write them back from InDesign because the way it got created was before we started using it for print, and it doesn't have a special ID on it. Any questions about related child assets or sibling assets or parent assets? Anybody out there on the remote side?
Can you go back to that personalization? How did we get to that?
So do you mean for the image itself, like making it mugshot and stuff like that? Yeah. So if you're on now another thing to note too, you know, if you know where a photo is attached to something, you don't have to hunt for it. You've got that
story right in front of you, you can open assets directly from the related tab and mess with them. So the presentation mode is what that's called, and that exists in both the print side, or sorry, the article asset and on a photo asset. It's just different options. So the photos are going to have, and all these correspond to something on your web system, the web CMS that does something. Panorama is those ones that are really wide. You know, the infographic allows you to create a map with all these photos that point to certain places. The one that you're going to use for print specifically is mugshot. So that's inside an image asset, presentation mode, mugshot.
Okay.
And then back here on the article, there's only two options, long form and personality, and you'll know what to do with those based on the kind of content that you're messing with. Okay, so let's go to the tab called Other. We'll quickly run through some stuff here. The Do Not Publish, you generally are not going to manually check that, but it's a great tool if somebody sees something live on the website that shouldn't be there or it has mistakes. Open it up, click Do Not Publish, save, and the next minute and a half, it'll pull it down from the web. The minute you uncheck it, save again, it'll go live again. So that's your ultimate toggle for can the public see it, is the Do Not Publish button. Disallow reactions and user commenting, keep using that as you are. Generally, crime stories get the disallow user commenting because there's a lot of really mean people out there who attack victims or just say really nasty, awful things about, you know, whatever. So that gets disabled a lot of places. You pretty much never touch source. That's something that AP moves, and so we just make a field for it in case somebody needs to use it. The archive date and time and the delete date and time, by default, nothing will ever happen here on stories you create. But the archive date and time kind of allows you to have a story be live for a certain amount of time, and then once it reaches the time you set it, the day and time, it's going to check the Do Not Publish when it hits that time, so it'll pull it off the web. We had a contest in Tucson. Each day we had it change a little bit. Instead of me every day, because that was my task to handle that, instead of me every day updating an asset or remembering to create a new one, I did it all in like an hour, like not even an hour, like half an hour on a Monday. I created 5 assets, and they had all the stuff they needed in them, and I set them to have to start at midnight one day, and then have an archive date and time for midnight the next day, and just did that for each of them. So I scheduled that throughout the week and planned it so it was already done and it automatically happened. So keep that in mind. You've got some tools to automate even stuff like that, and probably more for digital folks who are handling that stuff, but it's good to keep that in mind. Delete date and time. We're never going to delete your content. Anything you create from scratch will always be in this system. It will never go anywhere unless you manually delete it or manually enter a delete date and time. Just like the archive date and time, when it reaches the said day and time, it's going to check the delete option, and then it's going to go to your deleted queue. You've got 7 days from that point to get it back. AP stuff, anybody using Associated Press, it's going to have a delete date and time of 30 days after the original start time, which is like when you create an asset going to be whenever it was created, whenever it came into the system. There's a couple more things down here. We've got kickers and hammers. If you guys use those for print, this does actually work for both print and web. Kickers are generally labels above a story. Used a lot in sports. It might say NBA right above, small letters above the headline, NBA Roundup, something like that for basketball. Hammers are going to be your 100-point sans serif headline, and I think Bethany said they're not used real often, but keep in mind that it gives you another layer of control over the headlines. If you've got a package of stories and you want to have a headline that goes over all 4 of those stories, you can use your main one that's the biggest story. You can throw a hammer in there and it's going to give them a headline. So then your designer isn't asking you, hey, I've got this, package. Do we want to have a headline over the top? Hammer is how you'll handle that. So it'll give them a hammer, and then it'll also give them any headline that comes along with it, any sub-headline. And that gives you guys control, the folks who are creating the content, over that, so your designers aren't confused by it. Notifier, talk to your digital team on that. That's broadcast. I believe there's some stuff that's weird about it now. Good, yeah, and I think they changed this from broadcast to notifier, and there was a big email that went out, and I think they might have done like a staff and lunch and learn or something like that. But I don't deal with that side of it enough anymore. I have experience with the Blox CMS because I used it in practice, but it's been 5 years now, so there's a lot of differences. So I can help with some things, but generally you're going to want to go to your digital team on that. The location, very handy tool, web only, does not allow you to use this in print. It never will work for print as long as we're using Google. They've told us as much. What it does, though, is it gives you on your website a nice little map that would show up in this space that people can click on and get directions from.
You used it yesterday, didn't you?
Yeah, we did.
Yeah.
Nice, very nice.
We used it in Tucson a lot in high school sports. There'd be a track meet in Kingman that some local school or some kid was going to. We would put the location of it in here so that people then could, people here don't go to Kingman very frequently, I don't think. They knew where to go. They could follow that on their phone, et cetera, et cetera. Also very nice for stuff like brush fires or things that happen that don't have an address. You can use latitude and longitude, and it will give you a map with a pin where that is. Something we have frequently here, lots of wildfires because it's mostly humans doing something stupid, but also it could be lightning strikes. And maybe you know where that started. The fire departments released that. You can plug that in directly there. The only downside to this, again, not for print, only works for web, never going to work for print. Also, you only get one. You can't do more than one. And there's a lot of times when you might want to have more than one. There's a way to get around that by using a collection asset and certain presentation mode for it. If you guys aren't aware of that, I could probably show you at some point, probably for mostly Alessia and Sean there, so then trickle down. All right, workflow we talked about. The only time you'll really ever come here is going to be to click on the button and change between workflows. And then the process, yeah, again, that's going to happen from your save button. You're going to promote and all that stuff. Custom properties not being used. Revisions, we currently only keep the last 10. So as you click the save button, they're all out of order too. There's some weird bug with this thing. Once I get past 10, see now I don't have the little eyeball on them. It's only going to keep your last 10 saves. That's going to change at some point. They're going to move that up to the same thing we have on the Blox Total CMS inside the server, the local one. We keep 50 on that because it's not tied to the web, but I think they figured out a way to do this without impacting performance. Okay, so I'm going to cancel, I'm going to save and close this guy and get out of here. Yeah, so I want to touch real quick on the searching. So when you guys are looking for stories, the slug is a super, super handy tool to find stuff. So what I did is I set up my story earlier based on a slug that started with that date. Now, if I do a slug search just for that, I'm not going to find anything because it's looking, I'm telling the system, again, this is different than your top one, which is Google search. Google search is put in whatever case, you can put whatever case, it can be all upper, it can be all lower, it can be a mix, doesn't matter. Here, it's very important that you get, what it's doing is looking for an exact match, and it's important that you follow those rules. So I know that's a part of my story, but if I click search, it's going to find nothing because there's not any story that has specifically those 6 digits in it. So how do I get around that? Well, this is where we get into the power of this feature that is kind of a pain to learn up front with a little bit of a learning curve, but has a lot of flexibility and power down the road. So now I put an asterisk on the end of it. That's a Shift 8. And the rule of thumb, every slug search, put an asterisk at the end of your search. Every single one. Even if you think you have a direct match, as I was saying earlier, you don't want to use spaces. Let's say somebody accidentally put a space at the end of their search. If you try to find it based on an exact match of the search without an asterisk, it's still not going to find it because there's that extra character on the end. And anybody who's ever done page design knows that there's always extra spaces and returns on stuff. It just is how it happens. You don't see it, so why take care of it? Well, it can cause you issues with slug. So now I've looked for that date string with an asterisk on the end of it, and you see it just popped up that story now. And in fact, this is the most common search that anybody will ever do today, or it's the date of publication hyphen section. And that's going to pull up every story for that day in that section. I think I had some in here yesterday that were, I had a sports one in there yesterday. So you see, oops, I don't know if I did. Well, I don't remember what it is. So let's take that code off and look and see what we did have. I don't know if there's just one. I may have actually set it for 11. So there's nothing in there with a 12. Looks like we only, oh, I was on a different CMS. So I'm not finding anything by those, but you see how easy it is to get what you're looking for. So your searches via slug are almost always going to be what you see here. You can go further than that. And this is also why if you want to tack something onto the end of it, like my initials, it doesn't really matter if it's after the part that's the actual slug, because you're putting that asterisk on the end of it, you're always going to see every story that's got the beginning part of it. Does that make sense to everybody? It's going to take some getting used to, because you have to remember to put that asterisk on. People are inevitably going to submit stories to you that have an uppercase letter in it. So you're going to kind of have to, you know, if you can't find it, then back up to just that. And then you'll get every story for that day, and you'll be able to see now, because we don't have that part in there, it would pull up anything that's got a capital in it. And then you can, of course, stack those on top of other searches. So the second most common thing to do is go to workflow If you're an editor, you're probably looking at first edit. There's nothing there, I can tell, because the search is only finding that, so there's nothing there. But that's what people will do. They'll have a saved search for first edit, all first edit, and then they'll come up when they run it and they'll drop in the date string, and maybe they'll say news because you might also have business or something else in there. And then all day an editor has a tab open and they're just clicking search and waiting for new stuff to pop in. Again, it's not going to happen live, so there's going to have to be some communication, or you'll just keep clicking it until you find it. Okay, so real quick, I'm going to jump over to our Pagetracker. We have not yet talked about. And actually, I'm not going to do that here. I'm going to go to the Victoria Advocate in Texas, because they have a very good setup for this. I can't really show you here because there's nothing in there yet. These guys have been producing publications, and they've got a lot of stuff in there, so let's jump over. Well, I can get my password right. Don't use that password again, Dylan. I'm struggling to type it right. With the change ours every 60 days in Town News, so I don't know how it is for you guys, but try to pick something that's easy to type. Did not do that this time. Okay, so what we're looking at when you come to Pagetracker, again, it's out of your sort of home button that I like to call Blox home button, and in your editorial programs, you'll see Pagetracker. You may not see all these. You may not see it right now because we need to set your user to have permission to see it. I know that's something we've talked about already, so by the time we go live, you guys all have access to it. By default, it's going to show you either today's date going forward or the next day's date going forward. You can change that. I come back here and make this just March 1 and do a search. You see it's going to expand quite a bit. Now I'm looking at all their publications, and I can kind of tell by looking at the pages and the status and the progress. 16 of 16 complete is what that says. And then, so if I go back here and look at tomorrow's, it looks like they have it in the system because there's pages, but there's nothing complete yet. They haven't really done anything with it yet. So I'm going to back up to the page or the paper that's already done, so we can look at that once you get an idea. So what we've got is the search results. You can see there's all the dates going forward. It's going to show us today going forward. Different publication codes will have different stuff here. That's some kind of special section they're putting together probably, or a weekly tabloid or something like that. There's the VAD as their main pub, so I'm going to open that one. This is today's paper. And the minute I open it, you see it creates it in a new tab up here. So I could have multiple things open if I needed to, if you're dealing with two papers and you want to follow them throughout the night. So the first thing I ever do is come here and I show gallery view, because I don't want to see the little thumbnails. I just don't find that to be helpful really at all, except just to glance at and see if something's done based on the little code there. I like this one a lot better because you can start to at least get a sense of what's on the page. And it also marries up facing pages together, so it shows you kind of what they'll look like. You get a sense of that. Now, right now, everything's done there, so everything's green, but just to show you what it'll look like in something that's not done, they'll all have red in the background. So it's also a way for you guys to track as editors and reporters and whoever you are. You could be, 1,000 miles away from your designers, but you can follow their progress throughout the night. Every save they make in InDesign, every time they make a proof, every time they send a page, it's going to send a new PDF to this application. And you can actually go get that. You can double click on it, and you've actually got even more content here. Another way to budget stories. You can open up the Pagetracker page and you can add an asset to it. And that will then take that story and it will assign it to it and give it that publication code that I showed you early on in the print tab. So there's another way yet to handle stuff. But you've also got some previews. This one isn't really used much anymore now that we're sending PDFs all the time. It's like a JPEG and you can't even really read it. It's just like a quick glance to see if headlines are okay, kind of. But you actually do get a PDF that you can look at, a full res PDF that's based on your, the preset that you're using for your print publication. So you can be sure that this is what the PDF that's getting sent to the plate will look like. And then you can download it from here. There's usually an option in Chrome and Firefox to download. So you have the option to go in and look at that stuff. Oops. You also will, it'll show every time there's a revision to a page who used it, the last person that was in that page. So it's a good way to track if something has gone wrong, that kind of stuff. When they build the sections, when Bethany builds sections, she's going to have a button that she clicks that will send the blank pages with the ads on them here. So you guys will know pretty much if she does it a certain time each day. You can come to your Pagetracker application. You can search for your pub. You can say, okay, is that there? And you'll see a bunch of blank pages, and so you'll know, okay, the pages are there. They can start working on them. Whether that matters to you or not is kind of up to your site, but that's kind of the long and short. Any questions about Pagetracker? Pretty straightforward how it works. You just got to remember to be able to get into, double click on them to get your PDFs if you want to. I think however you guys are doing editing, don't stop doing that right now if you guys are sharing with Dropbox and stuff like that. But be aware that this could be something down the road that would make it so you guys don't have to necessarily get an email from somebody. You don't have to wait for somebody to send you a page. You may still drop it back into Dropbox so they can make their corrections based on that, if that's what's happening.
Can you talk about how easy e-editions will be able to be uploaded after the?
Are you guys going to be using our live e-edition?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So what's really nice is that you're using our e-edition setup, and there's actually another place where that lives. You don't actually have to go there though, because what's going to happen is designers, as they send pages final, it's going to automatically populate your e-edition based on us setting that up. So
you don't have to upload to FTP.
You should never, if we're going to set them all up with live e-editions, you should never have to do that again. It's just going to automatically build it on the fly. Now there's going to be some stuff that you're going to want to look at, and the designers are going to need to know, because the e-edition, I don't think these guys are using live. Let's take a look at maybe they are. The live e-edition has got more going on. Yeah, of course, I can't get to it unless I do something else. They may not even be using it. Yeah, we'll worry about that part later. Live e-edition is kind of an extended functionality, and designers are going to need to know how to make things like brief packages and skyboxes that may get created on the page that aren't assets become the right asset, but they need to worry about that.
I mean, the general idea is that this is part of the efficiency that we're trying to create. Again, whatever can be generated by the fact that we're using a system, we can remove the manual.
Yep.
So all the folks who see this, if you can help me thank Dylan for your time today. I want to make sure we get everybody out on time.
Yeah.
Then Dylan, while I'm speaking, if you don't mind bringing up the Monday board, I just wanted to.
Oh, absolutely.
That we were talking about yesterday. So I want to reiterate something that Dan brought up, where he said it's all a little overwhelming. There's a whole bunch of stuff. You don't have to learn it all overnight, and we're going to be providing resources. This is not going to be, well, we did the training, you should know this. We're going to be providing one-sheeters. We're going to be providing resources to really, do this. In my past life as a consultant around usability and user experience, the way they teach, or the way they used to teach the NASA space shuttle astronauts is they would start with huge panels, 5, 6 things, and then you learn 5 or 6 things on the panel, and then 5 or 6 things within that. So if you really just focus on, for this launch and for this transition, making sure that we're using it so that we can get the print paper out. Really what we're focused on the digital side, and I'll give it Dan an opportunity to say a little bit more about that. On the digital side is we're really looking at, frequency and, timing of content, for starters. Even whether we're a daily publication or once a week in print, we're now 24 hours a day, essentially, ready to post at any point, but we're all dailies now. And the success is going to be directly related to that. It's also important to think of this platform. I know that there's a lot of digital components. The idea is that this is a system that allows us to go to whatever platform is appropriate for our audience. I will tell you, one of the unexpected things for me as we've optimized the subscription path on our website and made it easier for people to pay for content on our website, we've also simplified how easy it is for them to buy a print subscription. And we're actually up on print subscriptions. Do you have like a general number on print subscriptions since we revamped it?
574 since Monday morning.
So over total.
New digital subscriptions since we started.
But what about print?
I can.
Oh yeah, but we got a few hundred print, right?
Yes, from
so,
print and digital.
So that's the exciting thing is the easier we make the experience, the higher the quality of our content, the easier that we make it for them to provide the credit card online, the more people we're going to get. I mean, even a tiny number increase on print subscription is a reverse in the trend. So we absolutely are going to be pushing to take advantage of digital. This is exciting on the print side as well, and this is a huge opportunity here. One thing I want to touch on before we let you go is Dan has done a fantastic job. If you can pull up the editors board. Yeah, if you go to the shareable board, and they click on WIC editors and reporters. So Dylan is sharing, and I know we sent out invitations. We'll send it out again. Dan has done a great job of starting and facilitating this conversation among our newsrooms. I'll tell you what, I'm blown away by the conversations that are already occurring on there. And I will tell you that the quality of the dialogue we have, and I'm not saying it has to be the Monday board, but it's a great tool, but the quality of this conversation is really going to drive the success that we have with our newspapers and our entire organization, and really help establish us as a leader when other people are kind of pulling back. What's exciting is just seeing, it doesn't matter the size of the publication within WIC. Some of the best ideas are coming from some of the smallest newsrooms. And we're also able to take advantage of some of the larger newsrooms and the experience we have. And for me, what's personally exciting as I'm meeting folks in person is seeing a blend of older faces, younger faces, a mix of men and women, you know, a mix of different backgrounds. And that's very exciting to me, is to take advantage of the diversity that we have in the size of our publication and the types of journalists we have. You know, I already see more diversity within WIC than I ever saw in any metro newsroom I ever worked in. So, you know, that's a key component. I won't touch on the Wasilla board because we're short on time. But Dan, did you want to say a little something about kind of the editorial direction?
Well, this board, this Monday.com, again, we do not need a middleman. We need all of our newsrooms pitching in their ideas, their experiences, or if they need help on something. You will see on this board a diversity of topics. It hits on everything. And so add to the conversation or learn from it, and get involved and be an adopter of this way of all of us sharing the ideas from around WIC. Again, you don't need one person, meaning me, to be the central place for all information. This way you just go right to everybody. And in coming weeks, we've been dealing with a consultant we're gonna help roll out to each newsroom, help in developing and going after the right kind of content, and just as importantly, getting it out there in front of readers consistently. And so we're going to hit each newsroom, visit each newsroom, and roll that out in coming weeks. We want you to get your arms around these total CMS changes first, and then we will hit you up with that other stuff. And I guarantee it is going to really help you with getting information and relevant content out to your audience.
Thank you, Dan. And I posted, as Dylan is showing, I've posted the user's manual for editors and reporters for total CMS here. We're going to follow up with some one-sheeters again. We're going to start out with the basics, and then we're going to build up. And I know we're a little bit over time, but I know we have a couple questions, so we're going to do a couple quick ones.
So I know, well, Jamie has some questions, and we'll start with those. So one of the things he mentioned is how to handle and create the base pages or dummies. And I know in Vision Data that we are able to create ad dummies, but if they want to create a base page, how do we do that?
What are the base? You just mean Jamie just creating blank pages that are going to then be used that day to put news content on? Well, what I mean was we have a graphic coordinator here who puts the ads on the pages. Those get sent to the news flow folder, and then the designers use those to lay out. Those are what then the content gets put on. But how's this going to work now? Is there a different process for that? What's the process going to be?
Yeah. So when you're talking about somebody, you know, laying out the ads, are they using Vision Data's TAL plugin to do that? Okay.
I don't.
So yeah. What's going to happen now is instead of sending the actual file for somebody to open and use those actual pages, once that part's done, that's still going to happen, the dummying. Once that's done, there's an option in the TAL plugin to export an XML file, and there's an option in there for Town News. So what format do you want? And there's Town News is one of the 4 or 5 publications they support there. And then that's
we are not using Vision Data TAL.
Oh, you're not?
No, I've never even heard of that. But we just We get a list, we get a manifest with ad numbers. They're downloaded from Expanse, they're put into a folder, and then they're put onto a page.
And so some of our sites are using the plugin for InDesign, so we have to look at the pagination.
Yeah, we'll have to come back to
Yeah, that'll be a follow-up. We are doing a test feed of ads this week, you know, to make sure that that works. But that's also going to eliminate page designers and, you know, other folks having to hunt down ads and holding up press runs and things like that when it's, you know, ad is in the wrong folder. It's really going to streamline there. Anything else?
And then again, another Jamie question, how to bring content from other places other than copy and pasting.
Yeah, so let's jump back real
So
quick.
just make sure while he does that is when we do copy and paste, we have to make sure that we use the plain text asset in the asset box, because if not, it brings all the styles that you have, like the bold and the underline, and it overwrites the styles that we have on our website. So we want to make sure we always use plain text to paste in. But
So specifically, just to quickly touch on that, because I didn't really go over too much of the assets controls as they are. You paste this plain text option is this little clipboard. You're pasting from anywhere outside of Blox, anything, Word, email, websites, wherever it might come from, always use this, because that's, Alessia was saying it can change your formatting on your site, but it'll also bring over code that will then show up in InDesign, and we don't want that at all. That's the last thing that your designers want to deal with is a bunch of code littered throughout.
Yeah.
So that's, yep, so that's, that was that one, and then I'm going to jump back real quick. We're going to talk about syndication here. So again, if you're pulling in content from another Blox CMS site that WIC owns, you're going to come to your syndication, editorial syndication. Again, that's up here. You're going to pick a channel, and then you can find, I'm looking at Cap Journal and Peer. So, you know, I can find a story about, well, there's a Trump story right there. So boom, I'm going to look and find that, and then I can select it, click add to site, click add to site, and now that's something that you guys will have. And it's got a little rotating thing because that means there's images getting downloaded. So that's how you'll do it from other sites. Now, if you're coming from Tribune News Service website or you're pasting from somewhere else, it's going to be copy paste. You just need to do what we were talking about a minute ago and make sure you're using the.
And for example, Jamie, if you do, like actually on the Herald, we just added AZ Mirror, which is an RSS on the syndication, and that's something that Dan's been working on, getting new content from this website. So we have the ability to import RSS feeds. So if you have a client that wants to share content with us, we would simply just need to set it up, and then you don't have to copy paste or anything.
I will talk with Forum News Service to see if RSS would be an option for us.
Okay, great.
That's great.
Yeah.
Thank you. So just a quick word about timelines. So we're not going to be going live with Total CMS until we've communicated with, you know, each of the newsrooms. And again, we're happy to provide whatever level of supplemental training is there. Dylan is going to be on site here in Sierra Vista next week, all next week, to assist in launch for newspapers that are done through Central Page Design. And one of our mantras around is, we don't launch anything on a Friday, we don't launch anything on a Monday. It's like, I realize we often don't get weekends, but we're going to give Dylan a weekend. And we're also going to, you know, try to make sure that we've got a little bit of cushion there. So there are a couple of exceptions to those papers we're planning on going live with next week. For example, Green Valley, Sabrita, they're on different page templates, so we're going to be handling them separately. Nogales, just by virtue of being tied to another client as far as page design, we have to coordinate them separately. And then there's there's a couple of new ones. I think maybe Ontario is one of the ones that we're waiting on, and Sydney. Yeah, so we're going to be following up with specifics on this, but again, it's not going to be, okay, we've gone live. It's going to be, we're going to reach out, coordinate the time with you, and do that. So again, thank you. We know that this is a big commitment in time. We know there's a lot here. We know there's a lot of change. but we're extremely excited because we are all in about you guys. So thank you so much, and
Thank you.
have a great day.
Thank you guys very much. Appreciate your patience and your time.